Welcome. I'm Magnus, and I bring you horror stories to help you relax, or maybe to keep you up at night. Tell us where you're from. Are there spooky forests nearby? If you're a fan of scary stories, subscribe and drop a like. Get cozy, and let's begin. I'm Eliza Thornwood, 28 years old from Portland, had been living amongst the constant drizzle and perpetual green for far too long. My therapist suggested a change of scenery after my third panic attack in as many months, something about disrupting patterns and seeking novel environments. That's how I ended up driving my beat-up Honda across state lines toward the Trinity Alps wilderness in Northern California. I'd found an online forum where people discussed abandoned fire lookout towers, those skeletal sentinels perched on remote peaks. Tower 37, they called it, decommissioned years ago, but still standing. Perfect isolation, stunning views, and best of all, free accommodation if you were willing to ignore the no trespassing signs. The drive took longer than expected, winding mountain roads slowing my progress as afternoon shadows stretched into evening gloom. Cell reception disappeared hours ago, my GPS struggling to maintain a signal as I navigated increasingly narrow Forest Service roads. The rental agreement for my apartment sat and signed on my passenger seat. I'd promised myself this trip would help me decide whether to renew or finally make that career change to somewhere new. Somewhere with fewer memories of Jack, fewer reminders of our life before the accident. My headlights caught the reflective glint of an old Forest Service sign, barely legible beneath years of weather and neglect. Tower 37 access, 3.2 miles. The road deteriorated further, more pothole than pavement, forcing me to slow to a crawl. The trees pressed closer here, ancient pines and firs creating a natural tunnel that seemed to swallow my little car whole. Something darted across my path. Deer, maybe, and I slammed the brakes, heart hammering against my ribs as I caught nothing but a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. I should have turned back when I reached the gate. Rusted chain hanging broken from one post, warning signs riddled with what looked disturbingly like bullet holes. But I'd driven too far to quit now. Besides, the online forum had prepared me for this. Gates busted, just drive through. Nobody checks these remote towers. So I did, easing my car forward as branches scraped against the paint job I couldn't afford to fix. The wilderness absorbed all sound except my engine's labored breathing as it climbed ever higher. Tower 37 emerged suddenly from the darkness, a surreal structure silhouetted against the darkening sky. 40 feet tall with a cab perched at the top like a strange geometric head, its windows reflecting the last gasps of twilight. I parked in what must have once been a small clearing, now half reclaimed by the forest. The stillness hit me immediately. No traffic noise, no hum of electronics or distant voices. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the subtle popping of my cooling engine. Getting my gear to the top would be a challenge. I slung my backpack over my shoulders, grabbed a cooler and tent just in case the tower proved uninhabitable, and approached the base. The wooden stairs zigzagged upward at a dizzying angle, many boards visibly rotted or missing entirely. But what truly stopped me cold was the symbol carved deeply into the first supporting post, a crude stick figure with elongated limbs and an antlered head. Below it, freshly carved words, "Hunger walks here." My skin prickled, but I dismissed it as typical wilderness graffiti, probably carved by the same forum members who'd recommended this spot. As I began my careful ascent, each step creaking ominously beneath my weight, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. I paused halfway up, balancing awkwardly with my burden of supplies, and scanned the darkening forest edge. Nothing moved, yet the feeling persisted, a prickling awareness crawling up my spine. The trees seemed to bend inward, their silhouettes forming a ring around the tower's base. I told myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks, the culmination of too many sleepless nights and the long drive. Yet when I reached the trap door leading into the tower cab, I hesitated before pushing it open, overcome by the irrational certainty that something waited on the other side. The cab was empty, of course, dusty, littered with evidence of previous visitors, beer cans, candy wrappers, a single hiking boot inexplicably abandoned in one corner. But it was intact, the glass windows dirty but unbroken, offering panoramic views of absolute darkness. I switched on my lantern, illuminating the small square room that would be my home for the next 3 days. An old Forest Service desk remained bolted to the floor beneath the north-facing windows, and surprisingly, a mattress had been dragged up at some point, looking suspicious but not impossible to sleep on. I unpacked my supplies, feeling the tension begin to ease from my shoulders. Maybe this isolation was exactly what I needed. No demands, no expectations, no hollow sympathies or whispered gossip. Just me, alone with my thoughts and the vast California wilderness. Morning revealed what darkness had hidden, a breathtaking expanse of wilderness stretching to the horizon in every direction. Mountain peaks jutted like islands from a sea of emerald forest, their summits still holding patches of snow despite the June heat. I sipped coffee from my camping mug, relishing the simple pleasure of solitude, watching red-tailed hawks riding thermals between distant ridgelines. The tower cab offered uninterrupted views through its weathered windows, north to Mount Shasta's distinctive cone, east toward the barren landscapes approaching Nevada, south and west to endless forest. The isolation felt cleansing, but by midday, the first problems appeared. The water I'd collected from a stream at the base of the tower had a peculiar metallic taste that no amount of filtering seemed to remove. Worse, when I tried retracing my steps to find a different source, I discovered a disturbing anomaly. Animal carcasses, at least a dozen of them, carefully arranged in a near-perfect circle around the tower's base. Mostly small game, rabbits and squirrels, but also a young deer, its entrails removed with surgical precision. These hadn't been here yesterday. I would have noticed them when parking, and no natural predator would arrange kills in geometric patterns. I retreated back upstairs, suddenly aware of my vulnerability. The forum posts had mentioned nothing about hunting activities in this area, and this didn't feel like standard hunter behavior anyway. My hand trembled slightly as I double-checked my phone. Still no signal, as expected. The trap door leading to the cab had no lock, just a heavy wooden handle to lift it into place. I dragged the desk over it, creating at least some barrier should anyone, or anything, attempt to enter during the night. The first signs came as the afternoon waned. Movement at the forest edge, too deliberate for wind, too erratic for humans. Just glimpses caught between trees, something pale and elongated slipping between trunks approximately 7 feet off the ground. I told myself it was just deer, maybe elk, though the fluid movement matched neither. The binoculars from my pack revealed nothing when I finally managed to steady my shaking hands enough to focus them. But the unsettling sensation of being observed intensified, as though the entire forest had developed consciousness and found me wanting. As dusk approached, the temperature plummeted unnaturally. June in Northern California shouldn't feel like deep winter, yet my breath fogged before me, and ice crystals began forming on the inside of the windows. The thermometer I'd brought showed 27 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping rapidly. I bundled into my sleeping bag atop the questionable mattress, wearing every layer I'd packed. The unnatural cold seemed to seep through the glass, through my clothes, settling into my bones like an unwelcome visitor. Sleep proved impossible as the wind picked up, not the natural rushing of mountain air, but something that sounded disturbingly like words, guttural phonemes just beyond comprehension. Around midnight, I heard the first scraping sounds from below, something with considerable weight climbing the exterior of the tower. Not the stairs, but the actual structural supports, metal groaning under strain. My flashlight beam, when I finally gathered courage to direct it downward, caught nothing but the swaying trees. Yet the sounds continued, methodical and determined, working their way upward toward my precarious sanctuary. I huddled in the center of the room, knife clutched in white-knuckled fingers, as the temperature dropped further still and frost patterns spread across every window like invasive vines, obscuring my view of the outside world. The words carved at the tower's base returned to me with haunting clarity. Hunger walks here. My academic knowledge of Native American folklore flashed warning signals through my terror. Wendigo, the winter cannibal of Algonquian legends, the emaciated giant with insatiable hunger, the spirit of famine and desperation. But those were northern tribes, Minnesota, and Canadian stories. What would such an entity be doing in California? The rational part of my brain dismissed the thought, even as the primitive hindbrain screamed that something ancient and malevolent was circling my temporary refuge, testing for weaknesses, growing bolder with each circuit. Around 3 a.m., a new sound pierced the darkness. A voice, unmistakably human, calling my name. Eliza, clear as daylight, familiar in a way that turned my blood to ice water. It couldn't be. He was dead, 3 years buried after the climbing accident I'd never forgiven myself for. Yet Jack's voice continued, pleading for help, claiming to be lost in the woods below. I'm so cold, Liz. Please, I've been searching for you. The voice contained that specific catch in the throat he'd always had when genuinely frightened, the subtle pronunciation quirk when saying my nickname that nobody else ever quite replicated. It wasn't possible, yet my heart recognized truth my mind rejected. Dawn brought no relief. The unnatural cold persisted despite bright sunshine streaming through frost-covered windows. I hadn't slept, standing vigilant through the night as that voice, Jack's voice, alternated between desperate pleas and chilling laughter. It had circled the tower for hours, always just out of sight regardless of which window I peered through. The desk remained firmly in place over the trapdoor, though twice during the night something had pushed against it with enough force to momentarily lift the heavy wooden furniture several inches before I scrambled to throw my weight upon it. When I finally found courage to peer down from my vantage point as daylight strengthened, the circle of animal carcasses had transformed into something more disturbing, now arranged in a distinct pattern resembling antlers or tree branches spreading outward from a central point. More troubling, my Honda's doors stood wide open, engine hood raised. Something dark and organic spread across the windshield like grotesque finger paint. The implications were clear. Whatever stalked me knew I couldn't leave without descending to ground level, and it had ensured any quick escape by vehicle was impossible. The threat solidified at precisely 10:17 a.m. I noted the time compulsively, desperate to maintain some connection to ordinary reality. A cracking sound like splintering would drew my attention to the northeastern quadrant of my view. There, emerging from dense undergrowth with unnatural fluidity, stood a figure that my mind struggled to process. Unnaturally tall and gaunt, easily 8 feet in height, with limbs too long and joints that bent at impossible angles. Its skin stretched tight over a frame that seemed more avian than mammaloid, mottled gray-white like fungus growing on dead trees. But worse, far worse, was the face, or what remained of one. A deer's skull, partially decomposed, sat atop the elongated neck, antlers extending outward like a grotesque crown. Yet human eyes gazed from those empty sockets, Jack's hazel eyes, unmistakable even at this distance. Terror paralyzed me as the creature tilted that impossible head upward, regarding my sanctuary with terrible recognition. It raised one disproportionate hand, fingers extending at least 8 inches from palm to tip, and pointed directly at me with deliberate purpose. Then it opened what should have been a deer's fixed jaw, revealing rows of needle-like teeth where flat herbivore molars should be, and emitted a sound that could never emerge from either human or cervid anatomy, a high keening wail that overlapped with what sounded disturbingly like my name repeated in Jack's voice. I recoiled from the window, while rising in my throat, as the implications crashed over me. Wendigo, not just folklore, but something tangible, something hunting me specifically. The forum posts about Tower 37 hadn't mentioned anything remotely like this. Had I been set up, deliberately directed here? Or was this entity capable of accessing my memories, knowing exactly which form would paralyze me with grief and guilt? My supplies suddenly seemed pathetically inadequate. Some trail mix, jerky, 3 bottles of water, a hunting knife, and a nearly depleted phone battery. No signal, no way to call for help. The creature began its approach, moving with the stuttering, disjointed gait of stop-motion animation, as though reality itself struggled to process its movements between points in space. It covered ground with terrifying speed despite the awkward locomotion, reaching the base of the tower in seconds. Then it began to climb, not using the stairs but scaling the vertical supports directly, those impossible fingers finding purchase where no handhold should exist. The entire structure trembled with each upward surge, metal groaning under stress it wasn't designed to bear. I braced myself against the desk covering the trapdoor, but the assault came from an unexpected direction. The creature circled the exterior of the cab itself, spider-like in its movements along the outside walls. Then its face appeared at each window in rapid succession, that awful deer skull with human eyes pressing against the glass, frost spreading outward from each point of contact. The glass didn't merely fog, but transformed, ice crystals forming distinct patterns that resembled human faces in silent screams. Jack's face predominated, but others appeared too, faces I didn't recognize, dozens of them, presumably previous victims drawn to this isolated location. The temperature plunged further as darkness fell inexplicably at midday, the sun obscured by clouds that formed directly overhead with unnatural speed. The Wendigo continued its relentless circuit of my refuge, testing each window, each joint and seam of the structure. Wherever it touched, materials weakened, metal supports corroded visibly. With splintered, glass developed hairline fractures that spread like spider webs. It was methodically dismantling my sanctuary through some accelerated entropic process I couldn't begin to understand. And all the while, that voice, Jack's voice, alternated between seductive promises and horrific descriptions of what awaited when my shelter inevitably failed. By sunset, the tower cab had become a freezing prison, the temperature hovering around 0 degrees Fahrenheit despite the June date. The Wendigo had withdrawn temporarily, now circling the base in that same disturbing, not quite continuous movement, as though it existed partially in some other dimension. I knew with sickening certainty that it was patient, that it could outlast any human resolve or resource. More disturbing still was my growing hunger, a gnawing emptiness that seemed disproportionate to my actual nutritional needs. Even after consuming a protein bar, the hunger remained, accompanied by intrusive thoughts about the raw meat arranged in patterns below. Was this how it began? The Wendigo curse transmitting even before physical consumption occurred? The opportunity came unexpectedly during the creature's third circling of the tower's base. It had established a pattern, methodical in its patrol, taking approximately 12 minutes to complete each circuit. During these rotations, it exhibited an odd fixation with my disabled vehicle, stopping each time to trace those elongated fingers across the hood in the same distinct pattern. I realized this represented a narrow window of predictability in its otherwise erratic behavior, perhaps my only chance to reach the forest edge before it could intercept me. I'd spent hours silently preparing, fashioning primitive weapons from the few materials available in the tower cab. My belt had become a sling, the heavy metal flashlight its projectile. I'd torn strips from the mattress cover, soaking them in the small amount of lighter fluid left in my camping supplies, creating rudimentary torches using chair legs as handles. Fire seemed my only viable defense if native folklore held any truth. Wendigos were creatures of winter and darkness, potentially vulnerable to their elemental opposite. When the creature began its fourth circuit, stopping as expected at my Honda, I enacted my desperate plan. Moving the desk silently from the trap door required agonizing patience, each inch a test of nerve as the wood threatened to scrape against the floor. When the opening was finally clear, I lowered myself onto the stairs, torches and improvised weapons distributed about my person for quick access. The descent demanded perfect silence and constant vigilance. One creaking board would alert the creature to my escape attempt. Each step felt like crossing a minefield, my body weight distributed carefully to minimize noise as frost-covered wood protested beneath my boots. Halfway down, catastrophe struck. A step that appeared solid gave way entirely, my leg plunging through rotten wood with a crack that shattered the unnatural silence. The Wendigo's reaction was instantaneous, that horrible head snapping upward with mechanical precision, those stolen hazel eyes locking onto mine with predatory recognition. It abandoned all pretense of human movement then, launching itself toward the stairs with the fluid grace of a predator entering terminal pursuit. I had perhaps 15 seconds before it would reach me. Panic overrode caution as I abandoned stealth for speed, half climbing, half falling down the remaining stairs. The hunting knife found its way to my hand as I tumbled the final distance to solid ground, rolling to absorb the impact and coming up in a defensive crouch. The creature appeared above me, silhouetted against the darkening sky, its antlered head tilted at that unnatural angle. For one paralyzing moment, we regarded each other, predator and prey in the most primal confrontation. Then I struck the first match, igniting my makeshift torch with hands that miraculously remained steady. The Wendigo recoiled from the sudden flame, confirming my desperate theory. I used that momentary advantage to sprint toward the forest edge, not toward the access road where it would expect me to flee, but deeper into the wilderness where dense undergrowth might provide cover. Behind me, that awful keening wail rose in pitch, fury giving way to something like desperation. The voice, Jack's voice, dropped all pretense of humanity, devolving into guttural sounds that resonated at frequencies that made my eardrums throb painfully. The forest closed around me as I ran blindly into deepening shadows, torch held before me like a talisman. Navigation became secondary to speed and distance, each yard gained potentially representing another second of life. But the wilderness itself seemed to resist my progress, branches reaching like grasping hands, roots rising to trip my desperate flight. The growing darkness transformed familiar forest into alien landscape, depths and distances impossible to gauge accurately. And always behind me, that shuffling, not quite continuous movement, steadily closing the gap despite my head start. I reached a natural clearing as my lungs burned with exertion and temperatures continued to plummet around me. A decision point: continue forward into unknown territory or make a stand while I still possessed the strength to fight. The torch flame wavered, fuel nearly exhausted, its protective radius shrinking by the second. The Wendigo materialized at the clearing's edge, now moving with deliberate slowness, that deer skull weaving hypnotically from side to side. It knew I was trapped, that my options had narrowed to nothing. Not Jack, I whispered, finding courage in definitively rejecting its most psychologically devastating weapon. You're not him. He's gone. Something shifted in those hazel eyes, a flicker of frustration, perhaps, at the failure of its psychological warfare. The creature paused, reassessing, then began a slow encirclement of the clearing, cutting off potential escape routes one by one. My remaining torch sputtered, flame reduced to a pathetic flicker, as hypothermia began to set in despite my exertion. Fingers numbed, extremities losing sensation rapidly in the unnatural cold that accompanied the entity. In desperation, I implemented my final gambit. The sling, fashioned from my belt, had remained secured around my waist throughout the flight. Now I loaded the heavy metal flashlight into its crude pouch, began the rotation to build momentum, and waited for the Wendigo to present the perfect target. When it paused directly opposite me, that awful head cocked inquisitively, I released, sending the improvised projectile hurtling toward its skull with every ounce of strength remaining. The impact was satisfyingly solid, connecting with a crack that echoed through the clearing. The creature staggered, momentarily disoriented, as fragments of bone scattered from its damaged headpiece. That instant of vulnerability provided my opening. I charged forward, failing torch thrust before me, directly toward rather than away from the threat. The Wendigo, expecting continued flight, reacted a crucial half-second too slowly. The torch made contact with its desiccated form, flames catching on the papery skin with surprising vigor. The creature erupted in blue-white fire that spread with unnatural speed, consuming its emaciated frame as it emitted a shriek that contained multitudes, dozens of voices overlapping in a chorus of agony. I didn't wait to witness its destruction, using the distraction to sprint past the burning entity, choosing a direction by instinct rather than design, driven by pure survival instinct. 3 days later, a search and rescue team found me wandering along California State Route 3, severely dehydrated, suffering from exposure and mild frostbite despite the summer heat. My incoherent ramblings about Wendigos and possessed fire towers earned me a 72-hour psychiatric hold at Trinity County General Hospital. The attending physician diagnosed extreme stress reaction, hallucinations likely induced by contaminated water consumption. Tests confirmed elevated levels of natural psychotropic compounds in my system, possibly from mushroom spores in the tower's decaying structure. Rangers investigating my abandoned vehicle reported finding nothing unusual at Tower 37, just typical vandalism and weather damage consistent with decades of neglect. The circle of animal remains I described was attributed to normal predator behavior, possibly coyotes or mountain lions establishing territory. My car, they informed me sympathetically, showed signs of animal damage, but nothing supernatural. Bears were common in the area, often attracted to food left in vehicles. The engine damage likely resulted from my own negligence, they implied, though I had no memory of leaving the hood raised or doors open. I might have accepted their explanations, might have embraced the comforting diagnosis of temporary psychosis, were it not for what I discovered upon my release. My phone, recovered from where I'd apparently dropped it during my delusional episode, contained evidence the authorities hadn't bothered to examine. The photo gallery held dozens of images I had no memory taking, close-up shots of ancient petroglyphs carved into rocks near the tower base, depicting elongated figures with antlered heads. More disturbing were the selfies, automatic captures from when I'd activated the flashlight function during those terrifying nights. In the background of 3 consecutive images, barely visible in the darkness beyond my frightened face, stood a tall, emaciated silhouette with distinctively branching shadows extending from its head. The final piece of evidence arrived 1 week after my return to Portland. A small package, no return address, postmarked Trinity County. Inside, wrapped in butcher paper, lay a fragment of bone, unmistakably part of a deer's skull, scorched at the edges as though recovered from fire. Attached, a handwritten note on Forest Service letterhead. Found this near Tower 37. Thought you might want it returned. Not the first strange occurrence up there. Won't be the last. The signature was illegible, but the implication unmistakable. Someone knew what had happened, someone who preferred to remain unnamed. I made my decision that night, signing the rental agreement extension without hesitation. Portland would remain my home. I wouldn't run again. Whatever had occurred in those California mountains represented a brush with something ancient and incomprehensible, something that had nearly claimed me as it had clearly claimed others before. The Wendigo, I've since learned through cautious research, is not merely a creature but a concept, the embodiment of consumption without conscience, of hunger that can never be satisfied. Its appearance varies across traditions, but its essence remains constant. The transformation of human to monster through surrendering to insatiable desire. The most terrifying realization came gradually, as nightmares plagued my recovery. In those dreams, I see through the Wendigo's eyes, experience its insatiable hunger firsthand. I wake ravenous despite having eaten before bed, craving meat with an intensity that borders on madness. The doctors assure me this is normal, just my body recovering from trauma and exposure. But sometimes, catching my reflection in morning light, I glimpse something unfamiliar gazing back, something using my eyes as windows, watching and waiting. In certain angles, my shadow stretches taller than it should, branching outward at the top in subtly antlered suggestions. Most disturbing is my new awareness of temperature, the unnatural chill that precedes me into rooms, condensation forming on glasses I hold too long, houseplants withering when I tend them daily. Friends comment on my apartment's coldness despite summer heat, huddle in sweaters during visits that grow increasingly infrequent. I tell myself these are trauma responses, hypervigilance creating connections between unrelated phenomena. Yet the hunger grows stronger daily, my diet shifting increasingly toward rare meats, my thoughts lingering on the primal satisfaction of the hunt. The Rangers were correct about one detail. What happened at Tower 37 was not unique. Further research revealed similar incidents stretching back decades, clusters of disappearances around certain remote locations in wilderness areas nationwide, most attributed to exposure, animal attacks, or simply poor judgment by inexperienced outdoor enthusiasts. But the pattern emerges for those willing to see it: seasonal cycles, geographical connections to indigenous territories, survivors describing nearly identical encounters spanning generations. The Wendigo is patient, ancient, and, I now understand with terrible clarity, communicable. The final text I received from an unknown number last week confirmed my worst fears. Hunger walks here too. Attached was an image of my apartment building taken from the street below, my windows circled in red. I've stopped answering my door, stopped sleeping more than minutes at a time. The hunger has become nearly unbearable now, my dreams filled with visions of the forest, of running on all fours through moonlit wilderness, of flesh between my teeth. I've begun researching remote fire towers in Oregon's Cascade Range, feeling drawn to their isolation with an intensity one recognized as not entirely my own. Perhaps there, in another tower like the one where this began, I'll find answers. Or perhaps I'll become the answer for some other unfortunate soul seeking solitude in high places. Either way, the hunger walks, and increasingly, it walks with my legs. I'm Mason Delacroix, 34 years old from Seattle, had spent the last decade drowning in corporate monotony at a tech firm. I'm the kind of guy who used to live for weekend escapes, until those weekends became recovery periods from soul-crushing work weeks. That's why I'd finally taken the plunge, 6 months of unpaid leave to find myself, or whatever cliche people attach to midlife crises these days. My therapist called it a breakthrough. My boss called it career suicide. I called it my last chance to remember who I was before spreadsheets and performance reviews defined my existence. California's Sierra Nevada mountains called to me for reasons I couldn't articulate. Something about the combination of isolation and elevation, like standing above the world's problems rather than being crushed beneath them. I discovered an online community dedicated to exploring abandoned fire lookout towers, those forgotten sentinels of wilderness protection now rendered obsolete by satellite technology. Corkin Peak Tower in the Stanislaus National Forest particularly fascinated me. Operational until 1989, then abandoned but never demolished. According to forum posts, it remains structurally sound, offering panoramic views and absolute solitude for anyone willing to make the challenging 5-mile hike from the nearest accessible road. My Jeep handled the deteriorating Forest Service roads admirably, though the final stretch tested even its 4-wheel drive capabilities. Massive potholes and washouts forced me to navigate at walking pace, wincing each time the undercarriage scraped against exposed bedrock. The GPS lost signal an hour before I reached the designated parking area, little more than a widening in the road where weeds pushed through cracked asphalt. A weathered sign, barely legible beneath lichen growth, confirmed I'd found the trailhead. Corkin Peak Lookout, 5.2 miles. The late afternoon sun filtered through dense pine canopy as I shouldered my overstuffed backpack and locked the Jeep. I'd probably overprepared, but isolation demanded respect. Tent, sleeping bag, water purifier, first aid kit, enough dehydrated meals for a week despite planning only 3 nights, emergency satellite beacon, and the small caliber handgun my father had insisted I take. Not for people, son. For mountain lions or bears if they get desperate. The weight pressed uncomfortably against my shoulders as I consulted the topographic map, confirming the steady climb ahead. The trail began innocuously enough, gently ascending through mature forest punctuated by massive granite outcroppings. The quietness struck me immediately. No distant traffic hum, no airplane noise, just wind through pine needles and occasional bird calls. My boots crunched rhythmically against decomposing pine needles, each step releasing the sharp scent of resin. For the first time in months, the constant mental chatter of work deadlines and relationship failures faded, replaced by the simple awareness of breathing and movement. 2 miles in, the forest composition changed, trees becoming stunted and twisted as elevation increased. The trail narrowed, in some places nearly disappearing beneath rockfall from nearby cliffs. I checked my watch, still 3 hours until sunset, plenty of time to reach the tower if I maintained pace. Something rustled in the underbrush to my right, freezing me mid-stride. A flash of movement caught my peripheral vision, too large for squirrel or marmot. Mountain lion? Bear? I stood motionless, senses heightened, but the forest had fallen eerily silent, not even bird calls breaking the sudden stillness. As I climbed higher, the silence deepened, becoming almost physical in its intensity. Even my footfalls seemed muffled, as though sound itself struggled in the thinning air. The first indication something was wrong came at mile 4, when I encountered a hiking boot, relatively new, expensive brand, abandoned beside the trail. Not unusual in itself. Hikers sometimes develop blisters and switch footwear. But the placement seemed odd, positioned upright as though its owner had simply vanished while standing. More concerning was the dark staining around its edges, substances I deliberately chose not to examine closely. The tower appeared suddenly as I crested a final steep section, a skeletal silhouette against the darkening sky. 40 feet tall with a small cabin perched atop cross-hatched metal legs, it dominated the granite dome of Corkin Peak. Solar panels glinted on the roof, a modern addition according to forum posts, installed by Forest Service crews who occasionally used the structure during high fire danger seasons. That explained its relatively good condition compared to other abandoned lookouts. What the forums hadn't mentioned were the symbols painted on each support leg. Intricate spiral patterns in dark red, reminiscent of indigenous rock art, but somehow wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. They seemed to shift slightly when viewed peripherally, settling into stillness only when directly observed. The first night passed without incident, though sleep proved elusive in my new surroundings. The tower cab, a 16 by 16-foot room encased in windows, offered breathtaking 360-degree views of wilderness extending to the horizon. I'd spread my sleeping bag on the built-in cot, surprised to find the mattress relatively clean and intact. Solar power fed into a battery system that provided minimal lighting and, unexpectedly, powered a small refrigerator humming quietly in one corner. Its presence struck me as odd. Forum posts hadn't mentioned such amenities. Inside, I found only a half-empty water bottle with no label, contents clear and apparently normal, though I opted to rely on my own supplies. Dawn transformed the landscape, revealing endless forest canopy punctuated by granite domes and distant peaks. I sipped coffee from my camping mug, mentally planning short hikes to nearby features marked on my topographic map. The isolation felt therapeutic after years of constant connectivity. No emails, no texts, no carefully curated social media updates, just immediate experience unmediated by technology. I'd left my phone in airplane mode, using it only as camera and occasional journal. The problems began subtly around midday. I descended to explore a small alpine lake half a mile northwest of the tower, enjoying the simple pleasure of skipping stones across its glassy surface. When I turned to head back, an unsettling disorientation gripped me. Familiar landmarks seemed shifted, distances distorted. What had been straightforward navigation became confusing, the tower itself occasionally visible, then disappearing behind ridgelines that shouldn't have obstructed the view given its height. I attributed the difficulties to altitude adjustment or perhaps slight dehydration. After 30 frustrating minutes following what should have been a direct route, I finally stumbled back to the tower base, disturbed to discover my carefully secured pack moved from where I'd left it. Contents remained intact, but rearranged. Food separated from cooking gear, clothing items refolded in ways I wouldn't have done. Rationality suggested animal interference, squirrels or marmots investigating for food, but the methodical nature of the reorganization suggested deliberate human intervention. Yet no other vehicles had been at the trailhead, and the register at the tower base showed no entries besides my own in over 3 weeks. First signs of genuine concern emerged as afternoon shadows lengthened. Reviewing phone photos taken that morning, I noticed anomalies in several images, indistinct shapes at frame edges, suggesting movement captured peripherally. One particular shot of the tower exterior revealed what appeared to be a face observing from the cab window, visible only when zoomed to maximum resolution, features blurred but unmistakably watching my position. The timestamp indicated I'd been alone on the ground when taking the photo, the tower presumably empty. Making dinner became an exercise in hypervigilance. Each small sound from the structure's metal framework amplified in my heightened state of awareness. The tower swayed slightly in stronger wind gusts, normal behavior for such structures, but increasingly unsettling as darkness fell. I'd chosen this isolation deliberately, yet now found myself longing for human contact, even the most superficial interaction with another person to ground me in normalcy. The satellite messenger remained an option for emergency extraction, but what would I report? Unexplained anxiety? Possible intrusion without evidence? Faces in photographs that might be pareidolia or digital artifacts? The decision to spend a second night in the tower rather than retreat to my tent reflected stubborn pride more than sound judgment. I secured the hatch leading to the exterior stairs with rope threaded through its handle and anchored to the built-in desk, not impenetrable, but sufficient to alert me to any entry attempt. Sleep came in fitful intervals, repeatedly interrupted by the structure's metal components expanding and contracting with temperature changes, producing sounds disturbingly similar to footsteps on the stairs. Around 3 a.m., I woke to absolute stillness, the omnipresent wind having died completely, creating a vacuum-like silence where even my breathing seemed intrusive. The battery-powered lantern cast weak illumination across the cab interior, shadows pooling in corners with unusual density. Something felt wrong about those shadows, their edges too defined, depths too absolute. As I watched, one particular darkness beside the refrigerator appeared to deepen, condensing into greater solidity while maintaining perfect stillness. I blinked, eyes straining in the inadequate light, uncertain whether I observed actual phenomena or manifestations of an overtired mind. Then it moved, a subtle shift defying easy description. Not expansion or contraction, but a kind of sideways slippage, as though reality briefly permitted something to step partially through from adjacent space. My rational mind scrambled for explanations: fatigue, hypnagogic hallucination, altitude sickness, cataloging possibilities while primitive hindbrain screamed warnings. I remained frozen, monitoring that wrong darkness from peripheral vision where it seemed most distinct, dissolving toward invisibility when directly observed. The temperature dropped precipitously, breath fogging before me despite seasonal norms suggesting comfortable nighttime temperatures at this elevation. Morning brought momentary relief, sunlight flooding the tower cab, dispersing night shadows and the irrational fears they'd harbored. I cataloged my experience as probable sleep paralysis, perhaps triggered by anxiety and unfamiliar surroundings. Yet the sensation of wrongness lingered, manifesting in small discrepancies throughout the space. The desk drawer I distinctly remembered closing now stood partially open. My journal had moved from backpack to desktop, though I had no recollection of placing it there. Most concerning, the hatch securing rope showed signs of tampering. Knots loosened but not completely undone. Daylight exploration revealed further anomalies around the tower base. The spiral symbols painted on each support leg had changed subtly overnight. Patterns more intricate, lines darker, and apparently fresher than the previous day's observations suggested. Footprints circled the structure in perfect concentric rings, too precisely spaced for casual passage. Most disturbing was their orientation, all facing inward toward the tower rather than tracking movement around it. I photographed everything methodically, evidence against my own doubting mind more than documentation for others. The threat solidified when I discovered the journal entries. My own handwriting filled 3 pages I had no memory of writing. Descriptions of watching myself sleep from outside the tower, observations about my breathing patterns and moments of wakefulness. The entries included details impossible for me to know, childhood memories never shared, conversations with my therapist, precise language from personal journal entries stored in password-protected files on my home computer. The final line chilled me most. I've been waiting for someone like you. Alone, searching, halfway to believing already. Something was clearly wrong with the tower, with this place, with my perception or sanity or both. I packed efficiently, abandoning non-essentials to increase movement speed for the descent to my vehicle. The satellite messenger came to hand as I considered sending an emergency signal. But what could I report that wouldn't sound delusional? Instead, I documented my plan to descend immediately, location coordinates, and expected arrival time at the trailhead in my phone notes. Evidence of rational planning should search become necessary. As I moved toward the hatch, the first physical manifestation occurred. Temperature plummeting instantly from comfortable to freezing, condensation forming on all windows simultaneously in intricate fractal patterns. The metal floor vibrated beneath my boots as though massive machinery operated somewhere within the structure's skeleton. Most terrifying was the sudden pressure change, ears popping painfully as something altered the atmosphere within the enclosed space. The hatch, when I reached it, refused to budge despite application of my full strength, secured by forces beyond simple mechanical locking. Trapped in the tower cab with something increasingly tangible gathering substance from those unnatural shadows, I faced limited options. The windows, designed for fire observation, were fixed in place rather than openable. Breaking one meant potential 30-foot fall onto unforgiving granite. The satellite messenger might bring rescue eventually, but eventually suddenly seemed an eternity away. Whatever presence occupied this space with me was accelerating its manifestation, darkness pooling in corners despite midday brightness outside, coalescing into suggestion of limbs and features just beyond clear perception. The temperature continued dropping, frost forming across all surfaces including my clothing and skin, patterns suggesting deliberate arrangement rather than random crystallization. The symbols visible on exterior support legs now appeared reproduced in miniature across frosted windows, multiplying and connecting into complex networks like circuitry or neural pathways. Most disturbing was the growing certainty of familiarity, recognition of these patterns from dreams or forgotten experiences, resonating with something deeply buried in my subconscious. Something moved within the largest shadow concentration, a deliberate shifting suggesting awareness and purpose. Not animal movement, but something more calculated, observational. I retreated to the center of the small space, maintaining maximum distance from all corners while retrieving my father's handgun from the backpack. The weapon provided minimal psychological comfort despite rational understanding of its likely ineffectiveness against whatever manifested here. The shadows continued their impossible behavior, deepening beyond what available light conditions should permit, edges becoming more defined while contents remained impenetrably black. The attack came without warning, not from condensing shadows but from reflections in the windows surrounding me. My own image, replicated 12 times in the glass panes, moved independently of my actual position. Reflections stepped forward while I remained motionless, pressing hands against glass from the outside, though they originated from my inside position. Their expressions shifted subtly from my own, mouths stretched wider, eyes darker with pupils expanded beyond natural limits. One by one, each reflection distorted further, features elongating and blurring while maintaining recognizable aspects of my face. A voice emerged from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, using my vocal patterns but modulated through impossible acoustics. We've been so alone. So very alone for so long. The words vibrated through metal floor and support structures, resonating in my bones rather than simply reaching my ears. But you came searching. You always come searching eventually. My reflection in the northern window spoke independently, mouth movements synchronized to these words while my actual lips remained closed in horrified silence. The escape opportunity materialized unexpectedly as the entity's manifestation reached critical intensity. The physical laws governing normal reality appeared increasingly strained within the tower cab, shadows moving against light sources, objects hovering momentarily when dropped, reflections operating independently of their sources. As these phenomena multiplied, I noticed correlating fluctuations in the tower's structural integrity. Support beams occasionally became translucent, solid metal briefly transparent before resolidifying. These transitions followed predictable patterns, synchronized with particularly intense shadow movements. I formulated a desperate plan based on observation of these cycles. The hatch leading to exterior stairs experienced momentary phase shifts approximately every 7 minutes, its solid matter briefly destabilizing. If timed perfectly, this presented a narrow window to potentially pass through the otherwise sealed exit. The entity seemed aware of my analysis, shadow concentrations gathering more densely around the hatch area, as though understanding its vulnerability. My reflection spoke again from surrounding windows. The door between is opening. It works both ways. You can't leave now that we're becoming. The next phase shift would arrive in approximately 40 seconds based on the established pattern. I positioned myself directly above the hatch, backpack secured, weapon holstered for mobility. The shadows surged forward as the countdown approached, abandoning subtlety for direct intervention. Darkness flowed like liquid across the floor, coalescing into appendages that grasped at my ankles with cold pressure that penetrated through hiking boots to skin beneath. My reflections watched from surrounding windows, expressions transformed to hungry anticipation, hands pressed against glass as though eager to break through their two-dimensional constraints. The moment arrived, metal beneath my feet shimmering with brief translucence. I dropped instantly, leveraging full body weight against the temporarily insubstantial barrier. Passage through solid matter defied description. Neither painful nor pleasant, but fundamentally wrong. Like moving through reality's coding rather than reality itself. For an eternal instant, I existed simultaneously in multiple states, awareness fragmented across possibilities before suddenly re-solidifying halfway down the exterior stairs, violently nauseated but intact, and outside the contained wrongness of the tower cab. I descended remaining steps at dangerous speed, metal clanging beneath desperate footfalls. Behind me, something shattered, the cab windows imploding simultaneously, glass fragments floating momentarily in defiance of gravity before shooting outward like shrapnel. I ducked instinctively, several pieces slicing across my exposed neck and scalp. The entity wasn't contained by the tower structure as I'd hoped. Its influence extended to the surrounding area, shadows stretching unnaturally from support beams despite midday brightness. The forest offered illusory sanctuary as I sprinted from the tower base, choosing the most direct route toward the access trail rather than the winding path I'd originally ascended. Navigation became secondary to speed and distance, each yard gained potentially representing another second of continued existence separate from whatever sought incorporation. The shadows pursued, not just behind but ahead and alongside, moving through the forest with impossible fluidity, flowing between tree trunks and across open ground like spilled oil animated by malevolent intelligence. A life spent predominantly indoors left me poorly conditioned for sustained running across difficult terrain. Lungs burning, muscles screaming protest, I stumbled frequently on exposed roots and loose rocks. Blood from scalp lacerations obscured vision in my right eye, perception further compromised by adrenaline and growing hypoxia at elevation. Yet awareness of my pursuer injected impossible energy into failing limbs, carrying me beyond normal physical limitations. The shadow entity maintained steady pace, neither gaining nor losing ground, suggesting it toyed with me rather than exerting full capability. 2 miles from the tower, I encountered the first physical barrier, a recent rock slide that had obliterated the trail, creating a 30-foot drop where stable path had existed during my ascent. Beyond lay the continuation of the access route and eventually my vehicle, but the immediate obstacle forced critical decision-making under duress. Circumnavigation would require precious time and unknown terrain. Descent and reascent of the slide area presented significant injury risk. Retreat meant facing the advancing entity directly. The shadows flowed around surrounding trees, converging like predators sensing trapped prey. The decision crystallized as neighboring shadows began merging, condensing toward more substantial manifestation. I secured my backpack tightly, cinching all straps to prevent shifting during movement, then approached the rockslide edge. Loose scree suggested treacherous footing throughout the descent, but strategic planning identified a potential route utilizing larger stable boulders as stepping points. My reflection appeared in a small puddle at my feet, mouth moving independently. "You're still inside. This is all still inside. There's nowhere in this mountain that isn't us now." I began the descent, testing each foothold before committing weight, using exposed tree roots for handholds where available. Progress remained agonizingly slow compared to the entity's fluid movement. It flowed down the rock face alongside me, maintaining perfect proximity without direct intervention, psychological warfare apparently prioritized over immediate capture. My father's weapon provided negligible comfort. What effect could physical projectiles have on something that manipulated shadow and reflection, that moved through solid matter during phase shifts? Halfway down the slope, disaster struck as a seemingly stable rock dislodged beneath my weight. Momentum carried me uncontrolled through tumbling scree, protective instincts curling my body around vital areas as sharp stone edges tore through clothing and skin. The world became chaos of motion and impact, orientation lost entirely until collision with larger boulder arrested movement violently, shoulder dislocating with audible pop that triggered primal scream torn from oxygen-deprived lungs. I lay stunned beneath settled dust cloud, physical pain momentarily overwhelming mortal terror. Blood flowed freely from numerous lacerations, right arm hanging useless, backpack somehow still attached, but contents likely damaged. Above, shadows converged at rockslide's upper edge, pausing as though considering most efficient approach. The entity's voice emerged from my own shadow, stretched unnaturally across broken ground. This form is damaged now. Perhaps we should find another. So many pass through these mountains. But you came specifically seeking. Those who seek always make better vessels. The shadow entity's momentary hesitation presented crucial opportunity. Despite excruciating pain, I forced myself upright, left hand fumbling for satellite messenger clipped to backpack strap. The emergency signal activation required sustained 3-second button press, simple under normal circumstances, but nearly impossible through shock and injury-induced tremors. As shadows began flowing downslope with renewed purpose, the messenger's confirmation light finally blinked activation, broadcasting distress coordinates to monitoring services. Help would come eventually, but eventually remained an eternity away from my immediate circumstance. Trinity County Search and Rescue found me unconscious in Emigrant Wilderness 3 days after emergency signal activation. Official reports documented extensive injuries, including dislocated shoulder, moderate concussion, numerous lacerations requiring 73 stitches total, and severe dehydration. My garbled explanations about sentient shadows and malevolent towers earned compassionate but skeptical responses from medical personnel, their diagnosis focusing on traumatic brain injury and possible altitude-induced hallucinations. The attending physician at Sonora Regional Medical Center carefully documented patient experiencing vivid delusions consistent with hypoxia and head trauma in my chart. My account of events diverged significantly from physical evidence, where I described violent pursuit and desperate escape across treacherous terrain. GPS data from the emergency beacon showed I'd never left the immediate tower vicinity. According to tracking information, I'd activated the distress signal while still inside the tower cab, then apparently fallen or jumped from the structure, sustaining injuries consistent with 30-foot vertical drop onto granite rather than tumbling down a rock slide 2 miles distant. Forest Service personnel reported finding me semi-conscious beneath the tower, muttering incoherently about reflections and shadows while attempting to crawl despite obvious broken bones. Most disturbing were the photographs recovered from my phone. The tower documentation I'd meticulously captured showed normal structure without mysterious symbols or strange shadows. No concentric footprint patterns appeared in ground shots. No evidence of intrusion or manipulation of my belongings. The time-stamped images created perfect alibi for rational explanation. Mental breakdown triggered by isolation, possibly exacerbated by undiagnosed medical condition or psychological vulnerability. One unexplained anomaly remained. Dozens of selfies filled my photo gallery. Taken throughout the night, I couldn't remember, each capturing my sleep-peaceful expression from angles impossible for self-photography. The hospital discharged me after 72 hours observation, shoulder immobilized in complex brace, prescription for pain management, and mild antipsychotics that I immediately discarded. My Jeep had been retrieved from the trailhead by rangers, awaiting at hospital parking with keys delivered by sympathetic nurse who'd helped wheel me to the exit. "You're not the first we've treated from Corkin Peak," she'd whispered while adjusting my sling. "Something about that place breaks people sometimes. 3 hikers last summer, 1 the year before. Same stories, same symptoms, different outcomes." Before leaving Sonora, I visited the public library, searching newspaper archives for missing persons reports in Stanislaus National Forest. The patterns emerged with disturbing clarity, clusters of disappearances every 7 years dating back to earliest records, concentrated around Corkin Peak and nearby wilderness areas. Most attributed to exposure, animal attacks, or simply poor judgment by inexperienced outdoor enthusiasts. But witness statements contained consistent elements when available: unusual shadow movements, electrical disturbances, doppelganger sightings before individuals vanished. The most recent cluster had begun last summer, right on schedule, with 3 hikers missing over a 2-month period. The drive back to Seattle took 3 days with my injuries, each mile increasing rather than diminishing my certainty about what had occurred. Rational explanations collapsed under accumulating evidence that only I possessed, memories too vivid for hallucination, physical sensations too specific for fabrication. Most telling was my reflections' changed behavior, subtle differences observable only to someone intimately familiar with their own appearance. Microsecond delays between my movements and the mirror image, occasional independent eye movements when viewed peripherally, the growing sense of being observed by rather than observing my reflection. Home offered no sanctuary from growing awareness of fundamental change. Electronics behaved erratically in my presence, lights flickering, digital displays glitching, cell phone battery draining at impossible rates. Shadows in my apartment stretched incorrectly relative to light sources, particularly during dawn and dusk transitions. Dreams filled with tower imagery evolved into something worse. Vivid experiences of observing myself from external perspectives, watching my sleeping form with predatory patience, exploring memories I'd never given permission to access. Most disturbing was the voice that increasingly narrated my thoughts, using my internal patterns but introducing subtle alien cadences. We're still becoming. The door between opened both ways. The final confirmation came 1 month after returning from California. My therapist, reviewing session notes during our first post-incident appointment, expressed confusion about appointment dates. According to her records, I'd attended 3 sessions during the precise week I'd been at Corkin Peak Tower. Impossible given geographical separation and my documented hospital admission. Her notes contained detailed accounts of our conversations, topics we'd explored, her observations about my unusually intense eye contact and altered speech patterns. I'd apparently discussed childhood memories I'd never shared with anyone, including incidents I had no recollection of experiencing. The implications crystallized with terrifying clarity. Something had emerged from the tower wearing my appearance, while my conscious awareness remained trapped there. Something capable of convincing manipulation, of accessing memories I myself couldn't recall, of navigating complex social interactions without detection. The hospital records, the search team reports, the evidence suggesting I'd never left the tower vicinity, all supported impossible conclusion that whatever I'd encountered had briefly gained substance beyond shadow and reflection, perhaps through the same phase shift vulnerability I'd exploited for escape. I sit now in my Seattle apartment, watching sunrise illuminate the city through windows that increasingly reflect impossible angles and movements independent of physical space outside. My shadow stretches incorrectly across the floor, occasionally shifting without corresponding body movement. Electronics no longer function reliably in my presence. This account typed laboriously on mechanical typewriter purchased specifically for documentation purposes. Sleep comes rarely, brings no rest when it arrives. The entity that followed me from California has established permanent residence within my perception, gradually expanding influence over physical systems surrounding us. Most concerning is the growing uncertainty about whether I truly escaped or simply experienced the illusion of escape as part of more complex incorporation. The dislocated shoulder has healed with unnatural speed, lacerations closed without scarring despite medical predictions. Physical evidence of traumatic experience fades daily, while psychological certainty grows stronger. Reflective surfaces increasingly show subtle divergences from expected imagery, my face occasionally sliding into expressions I'm not consciously forming, eyes watching with evident calculation rather than reflecting my own uncertainty. The research continues between increasingly frequent perceptual distortions. Historical records of Corkin Peak revealing construction over ancient indigenous sites, prohibition against settlement extending back centuries before European arrival. The tower itself built in 1938 during Civilian Conservation Corps projects, original construction team suffering unprecedented casualty rates from unexplained accidents. Operational records showing abnormally high turnover among assigned personnel throughout its active period, numerous psychological evaluations citing isolation-induced perceptual anomalies among lookouts stationed there. Yesterday, I received a text message from unknown number, coordinates for another fire lookout tower in Olympic National Forest, accompanied by simple message, "Others like you gather here. We're learning to contain it." Some succeed. The coordinates match location of decommissioned structure similar to Corkin Peak Tower, abandoned in 1970s but never demolished. I've packed essential supplies, loaded the Jeep for departure tomorrow morning. Whatever inhabits my perception now grows stronger daily, shadow self gradually supplanting original consciousness through processes I don't understand, but increasingly feel from both perspectives simultaneously. Perhaps those who gather at the Olympic coordinates have found methods to reverse the incorporation, to seal breaches between normal reality and whatever exists adjacent to it. More likely, the message represents another manifestation of the entity's expanding influence, drawing me toward further isolation where the transformation can accelerate without witnesses. The distinction hardly matters now. I feel myself becoming observer rather than participant in my own existence, watching from increasingly remote perspective as something else operates familiar machinery of voice and limb and social interaction. The fire lookout towers serve as doorways. That much seems certain. Junctions between layers of reality, normally separated by boundaries we lack vocabulary to describe. Those who seek isolation in high places sometimes find more than they bargained for, especially individuals already predisposed toward liminality through psychological fragility or spiritual yearning. The Forest Service records document decades of incident reports filed from such locations, most dismissed as altitude effects or psychological breakdown, statistical anomalies rather than evidence of systemic breach. Tonight I'll sleep one final night in familiar surroundings before tomorrow's journey toward Olympic National Forest. The shadow beside my bed grows increasingly substantial with each passing night, occasionally reaching towards me with appendages that should not exist in three-dimensional space. My reflection watches from bathroom mirror with expression of anticipation poorly disguised behind familiar features. We're still becoming. The voice that both is and isn't mine whispers through thoughts increasingly difficult to identify as originating from myself. The door between opened both ways. I simply haven't decided yet which side truly contains the horror, the ancient entity that breached reality's boundaries, or the human consciousness that invited it through by seeking what should remain unsought. I'm Elias Navarro, 29 years old, and I live in Fresno, California. The city's fine, but it's all strip malls and heat waves, so I crave escapes to wilder places. Last summer, I decided to camp at an abandoned fire lookout tower in the Sierra National Forest, a few hours from Fresno. I'd heard about these towers, rusted relics from decades past, perched high with views that stretch forever. My buddy Theo, 32, a wiry guy with a knack for fixing anything, came along. He's from Oakland, always chasing thrills. Then there was Lena, 27, a quiet artist from Santa Cruz who sketches landscapes like nobody's business. We piled into my beat-up Jeep, gear rattling in the back, chasing a weekend of solitude and stars. The drive up to the Sierra was a slog, twisting roads, no cell service, just static on the radio. Theo kept cracking jokes about getting lost, but I could tell he was stoked. Lena was glued to her sketchbook, capturing the pines blurring past. We stopped at a gas station in Prather, grabbing snacks and a cheap map since GPS was useless out here. The clerk, an old guy with a leathery face, gave us a weird look when I mentioned the tower. "Nobody goes up there no more," he muttered, ringing up my Doritos. I shrugged it off, probably just small-town paranoia. But his words stuck with me, like a splinter you can't quite dig out. We reached the trailhead by dusk, the sky bruising purple. The hike to the tower was steep, our boots crunching on pine needles. I was sweating through my shirt, hauling a cooler in my tent. Theo carried the bulk of the gear, humming some old punk song, while Lena lagged behind, sketching a gnarled tree. The tower loomed ahead, a skeletal frame against the fading light, windows boarded, rust streaking its metal legs. It felt off, like it was watching us. I laughed it off, blaming the creepy vibe on too many horror flicks. We set up camp at its base, tents in a loose circle, fire crackling by nightfall. The air turned chilly fast, and we huddled around the fire, passing a flask of whiskey Theo brought. Lena told us about her last camping trip in Big Sur, where she swore she saw a figure in the fog. Theo rolled his eyes, saying it was probably just a deer, but I noticed him glancing at the dark beyond our firelight. We talked about the tower's history, built in the 30s, abandoned after budget cuts. I wondered aloud who'd lived up there, staring at the forest for months. Lena said it'd make a great painting, but her voice was tight, like she was trying to convince herself. I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't alone. The forest was too quiet. No owls, no rustling critters, just our voices bouncing off the trees. Theo suggested a ghost story to set the mood, but Lena shot it down, saying real life was scary enough. She wasn't wrong. I remembered a news story from Fresno about a hiker who vanished in these mountains, never found. My gut twisted, but I chalked it up to the whiskey. We roasted marshmallows, the fire spitting embers, and I tried to focus on the warmth, the crackle, the stars overhead. Lena pulled out her sketchbook again, drawing the tower's silhouette. I peeked over her shoulder. Her lines were sharp, almost angry, like the tower pissed her off. Theo teased her about it, but she just smiled thinly and kept sketching. I wandered to the jeep for more firewood, my flashlight cutting through the dark. The beam caught something, a glint, maybe metal, in the bushes. I froze, heart thumping, but when I looked again, it was gone. Probably just a beer can or something, I told myself. Still, my hands shook as I grabbed the wood. Back at camp, Theo was trying to fix a wobbly tent pole, cursing under his breath. Lena had stopped sketching and was staring at the tower, her face pale in the firelight. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the structure. I followed her gaze, and for a second, I thought I saw a movement in one of the boarded windows, a flicker, like someone peeking out. I blinked, and it was gone. Exhaustion, I figured. Had to be. We were all tired from the hike, the drive, the setup. We decided to call it a night, crawling into our tents. I zipped mine shut, the nylon walls feeling flimsier than usual. Theo's snores started almost immediately, loud enough to wake a bear. Lena's tent was silent, but I pictured her sketching by headlamp, too wired to sleep. I lay there, staring at the tent ceiling, the fire's glow fading outside. The forest silence was heavy, like it was holding its breath. I told myself it was just nature, but a small, nagging part of me felt like something was waiting out there. As I drifted toward sleep, I heard it, a faint scrape, like metal on stone, coming from the tower. My eyes snapped open. It stopped, then started again, slow and deliberate. I sat up, heart racing, straining to listen. It wasn't Theo or Lena, they were both in their tents. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The sound faded, leaving just the oppressive quiet. I lay back down, telling myself it was nothing, just the wind or an animal. But deep down, I knew something about this place was wrong, disturbingly wrong. Morning light barely reached our camp, the tower's shadow stretching long and cold across the ground. I crawled out of my tent, my back stiff from the lumpy ground, eyes gritty from barely sleeping. That scraping sound from last night clung to my thoughts like damp clothes. Theo was already up, brewing coffee on a portable stove, acting like nothing was wrong. Lena sat cross-legged, sketching again, but her pencil moved slower, her face tight. I didn't mention the noise, didn't want to sound paranoid, but the air felt heavy, like the forest was holding a grudge. Theo handed me a tin mug of coffee, steaming and bitter. "Rough night, Elias?" he asked, smirking. I shrugged, sipping the brew, burning my tongue. I wanted to tell him about the scraping, but he'd probably laugh it off. Instead, I asked if he'd heard anything weird. He shook his head, but his eyes flicked to the tower for a split second. Lena stayed quiet, her pencil scratching louder than it should have. Something was off, and we all felt it, even if nobody said it. We decided to explore the tower before hiking the nearby trails. The ladder to the top was rusted, some rungs missing, but Theo insisted on climbing. "Gotta see the view, man," he said, already halfway up, his boots clanging. I followed, my palms sweaty on the cold metal. Lena stayed below, claiming she'd rather sketch the view from the ground. The climb felt endless, each step creaking like the whole thing might collapse. At the top, the trapdoor was padlocked, but the boards on the windows were loose, letting us peek inside. The tower's interior was a mess, dusty maps curled on the floor, a broken chair, a cracked radio. It smelled like mildew and something sharper, almost metallic. Theo poked around, picking up a rusted compass. "Somebody left in a hurry," he muttered. I nodded, my gut twisting. It reminded me of those abandoned houses you see on true crime shows, where people just vanish. I pushed the thought away, but the air up there felt wrong, like we were trespassing on something that didn't want us. Back on the ground, Lena showed us her sketch, a jagged outline of the tower, but with weird, shadowy shapes in the windows. "Just my imagination," she said, but her voice was shaky. I didn't buy it. Theo suggested we hike to a nearby lake to clear our heads, and we agreed, desperate for a change of scene. We packed light, water, snacks, Lena's sketchbook, and started down a trail marked by faded blazes. The forest was too quiet again, no birds, just our footsteps crunching. Halfway to the lake, we found an old signpost, half buried in dirt, pointing to a trail labeled restricted. Theo, being Theo, wanted to check it out. "Probably just some old ranger path," he said, already veering off. Lena grabbed his arm, her eyes wide. "Don't," she said, sharper than I'd ever heard her. Theo laughed, but he backed off. I noticed scuff marks in the dirt near the sign, like something heavy had been dragged. My skin prickled, but I didn't say anything. No need to make this scarier than it already was. At the lake, the water was still, reflecting the gray sky like a mirror. We sat on a rocky shore, eating granola bars, trying to act normal. Theo skipped stones, each splash echoing too loud. Lena sketched the lake, but her hands trembled, smudging the lines. I tried to shake the uneasy feeling, thinking of my last camping trip in Yosemite. Nothing creepy, just stars and beers. But this place was different, disturbingly so. I kept glancing back toward the trail, half expecting something to step out of the trees. Theo suggested fishing, pulling a small rod from his pack. I didn't have the heart to tell him the lake looked dead. No ripples, no fish jumping. While he cast his line, I wandered to the water's edge, spotting something odd. A piece of fabric caught on a branch, torn and faded. It looked like part of a jacket, the kind you'd see in a thrift store, not out here. I showed Lena, and her face paled. "That's not normal," she whispered. I stuffed it in my pocket, telling myself it was nothing, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, we headed back to camp. The trail felt narrower, the trees closer, like they were leaning in. Theo was quiet now, his usual jokes gone. Lena kept glancing over her shoulder, her sketchbook clutched tight. I tried to focus on the path, but my mind kept replaying that scraping sound, the glint in the bushes, the fabric by the lake. Something was wrong here, something horror-tinged and heavy, and we were too deep in the forest to just walk away. Back at camp, the tower loomed darker against the twilight, its rusted frame swallowing the last light. I couldn't shake the image of that torn fabric from the lake, now stuffed in my pocket like a bad omen. Theo started the fire, his hands steadier than mine, but his usual chatter was gone. Lena sat close to the flames, her sketchbook shut tight, her eyes darting to the trees. The forest was dead silent again, and that silence felt alive, like it was watching us. I tried to crack a joke about needing more whiskey, but my voice came out thin, and nobody laughed. We ate chili, the fire's warmth doing little to ease the chill in my bones. Theo kept glancing at the tower, like he expected it to move. "You think someone's been up there?" he asked, voice low. I shrugged, not wanting to admit I'd been wondering the same. Lena finally spoke, her words sharp. "Something's wrong with this place. I can feel it." She wasn't sketching anymore, just clutching her knees, her face pale. I wanted to argue, but the air felt thick, horror creeping in like fog. I pulled the fabric from my pocket, holding it to the firelight. It was rough, stained with something dark, maybe mud, maybe not. Theo leaned in, his brow furrowed. "Could be blood," he said, half joking, but his eyes weren't laughing. I stuffed it back in my pocket, my stomach lurching. I remembered a true crime podcast about a camper in Tahoe who'd disappeared, leaving only a shoe behind. This felt too close to that, too disturbingly real. Lena stood abruptly, saying she needed to grab her jacket from her tent, but I saw her hands shake as she walked away. Then we heard it, a low, guttural hum, like a machine but alive, coming from the tower. My heart slammed against my ribs. Theo froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. Lena stopped dead, halfway to her tent, her head snapping toward the sound. It wasn't the scraping from last night. This was deeper, vibrating through the ground. I stood, my legs wobbly, and grabbed my flashlight. "Stay here," I said, but my voice cracked. Theo was already on his feet, muttering, "No way, man, we checked this together." We crept toward the tower, the hum growing louder, pulsing like a heartbeat. The ladder creaked under our weight as we climbed, Lena trailing behind, her breath ragged. At the top, the trapdoor was still locked, but the hum was deafening, rattling the loose boards. Theo pried one open with a pocket knife, and we peered inside. The room was the same, dusty, abandoned, but in the corner, something glinted. Not metal, not glass, something wet. I swung my flashlight, and for a split second, I saw it. A shape, crouched, too big to be human, its eyes reflecting like a cat's. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the platform. Theo cursed, slamming the board shut. Lena was already climbing down, her boots slipping on the rungs. "We need to go," she hissed, her voice raw with panic. The hum stopped, sudden and sharp, leaving only silence. But it wasn't empty silence. It was heavy, like something was listening. My skin crawled, every instinct screaming to run. I'd seen enough horror movies to know this was bad, but this wasn't a movie. This was real, and something was clearly, terrifyingly wrong. We scrambled back to camp, our fire now just embers. Theo grabbed his axe, the one he'd brought for chopping wood, gripping it like a lifeline. Lena was shoving her sketchbook into her bag, muttering about leaving tonight. I wanted to agree, but the jeep was a 2-hour hike away, and the dark was thick, swallowing the trail. I remembered a story from Fresno about a family lost in these mountains, found weeks later, torn apart. My mouth went dry. Whatever was in that tower wasn't just a squatter or an animal. It felt ancient, hungry. I tried to calm everyone down, saying we'd leave at first light, but my voice sounded hollow. Theo kept pacing, axe in hand, while Lena sat by the fire, staring at the tower like it might come alive. Then we heard it again, not the hum, but a single, deliberate thud, like something heavy hitting the ground nearby. My flashlight beam swept the trees, catching nothing but shadows. Except one shadow didn't move right. It lingered, too tall, too still, just beyond the firelight. My breath caught, my heart pounding so loud I thought it'd give us away. Lena whispered my name, her voice barely audible, pointing to the ground near her tent. There, in the dirt, was a mark, not a footprint, but a deep, clawed gouge, like something had dragged itself across the earth. It wasn't there an hour ago. Theo swore under his breath, his knuckles white on the axe. I wanted to say it was a bear, a cougar, anything normal, but the truth was clawing at me. Whatever was out here wasn't just scary. It was wrong, disturbingly wrong, and it was coming closer. The thud echoed again, closer, like a fist pounding the earth. My flashlight beam shook as I swept it across the trees, catching that same unnatural shadow, tall, jagged, moving too fast. Theo gripped his axe, his face pale but set, ready to fight. Lena was already stuffing her bag, her sketchbook forgotten on the ground. "We're leaving. Now," she said, her voice sharp with terror. My heart screamed to run, but the jeep was 2 hours down a pitch-black trail. Still, staying here, with that thing circling our camp, wasn't an option. The air felt thick with horror, like the forest itself was closing in. We grabbed what we could, backpacks, water, Theo's axe. The fire was dead, leaving us in near darkness, my flashlight our only guide. We stumbled toward the trail, Lena in front, me in the middle, Theo at the back. Every snap of a twig felt like a gunshot. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting those glowing eyes from the tower. I'd seen enough scary movies to know running blind was dumb, but waiting for dawn wasn't safer. The clawed gouge by Lena's tent burned in my mind. Whatever made it wasn't playing around. The trail was a nightmare, roots snagging our boots, branches clawing our faces. Lena moved fast, her breath ragged, muttering about getting to the jeep. Theo kept muttering curses, his axe swinging with every step. I tried to keep calm, but my chest was tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I remembered a news story from Sacramento about hikers attacked by something in these woods. Rangers called it a bear, but the wounds didn't match. My skin crawled as I realized we might be next, trapped in a real-life horror show. Halfway down, we heard it, a low, guttural hum, like the one from the tower, but now it was behind us, weaving through the trees. My legs froze, but Theo shoved me forward. "Move, Elias," he hissed. We broke into a sprint, my flashlight bouncing wildly, shadows twisting into monsters. Lena tripped, her knee slamming into a rock. I hauled her up, her hands cold and trembling. "It's following us," she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. I didn't look back. couldn't, but I felt it, a presence so heavy it was like dragging chains. We reached a clearing, the trail splitting in two. The map was in my pack, but there was no time to dig it out. Theo pointed left, saying he remembered the way. Lena shook her head, pointing right, her voice shaking. The jeep's that way. I know it. I hesitated, my mind racing. Choosing wrong could mean hours lost, maybe our lives. The hum grew louder, closer, vibrating through my bones. I picked right, trusting Lena's gut, but Theo's scowl told me he wasn't sold. We pushed on, the forest swallowing us whole. The hum stopped, replaced by a sickening crunch, like bones snapping underfoot. My flashlight caught something, a flash of movement, too big, too wrong, darting between the pines. Theo swung his axe at nothing, shouting, "Show yourself." His voice cracked, betraying his fear. Lena clung to my arm, her nails digging in. I whispered for her to keep moving, but my own legs felt like jelly. I thought of those missing hikers, their faces on news bulletins, and wondered if we'd end up the same, another disturbing mystery. We stumbled across a stream, the water icy and slick. Lena slipped, soaking her jeans, but we didn't stop. The jeep was close. I could feel it, but so was that thing. Another crunch, louder, right behind us. I spun, my flashlight catching a glimpse of something hunched, its skin glistening like oil, eyes glinting in the dark. My scream caught in my throat. Theo swung his axe again, hitting a tree, the blade sticking. "Run," he yelled, yanking at it. We bolted, the trail blurring under our feet. The jeep came into view, parked at the trailhead, its faded green paint a lifeline. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them. Lena grabbed them, shoving them into my hand. "Hurry, Elias," she begged. The hum was back, deafening, shaking the ground. I unlocked the doors, and we piled in, Theo still clutching his axe. I turned the key, praying the old engine wouldn't stall. It roared to life, headlights cutting through the dark, but something slammed against the back, rocking the jeep. I didn't look, just floored it. Gravel sprayed as we peeled out, the trailhead vanishing behind us. My heart pounded so hard I thought it'd burst. Lena was crying, her hands covering her face. Theo stared out the back window, axe across his lap, muttering, "It's still there." I kept my eyes on the road, the tires screaming on the curves. The hum faded, but the weight of that thing's presence clung to us, a scary shadow we couldn't shake. We were alive, but we weren't safe. Not yet. Not with that horror still out there, hunting us. The jeep's engine roared as we tore down the mountain road, my knuckles white on the wheel. Lena was still shaking, her breaths coming in gasps, while Theo kept glancing back, his axe glinting in the dashboard light. The hum was gone, but the forest felt alive, watching us escape. I wanted to believe we'd made it, but my gut screamed we weren't clear of this nightmare. I remembered a story from Modesto about a driver who swore something chased his car at night. Nobody believed him. I believed him now. This was real, and it was disturbingly wrong. We hit the main highway, the lights of Prather flickering in the distance. I eased off the gas, my hands still trembling. "We're okay," I said, more to myself than anyone. Lena shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not over, Elias. It saw us." Theo snorted, but it was forced, his eyes still scanning the dark. I wanted to argue, to say we'd left that thing behind, but the weight in my chest said otherwise. Horror like that doesn't just let you go. We stopped at the same gas station from yesterday, the neon sign buzzing like a bad omen. The same leathery-faced clerk was there, eyeing us like we'd crawled out of a grave. I bought water, my hands fumbling with change, while Theo paced outside, axe still in hand. Lena stayed in the jeep, staring blankly at the dashboard. I asked the clerk if he'd heard of anything weird in the Sierra, but he just grunted, "Told you not to go up there." His words hit like a punch, and I realized he knew something scary he wasn't saying. Back in the jeep, Theo suggested we crash at a motel in Fresno, my hometown, to regroup. I nodded, desperate for walls and lights, anything to shake this feeling. But as I started the engine, Lena grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. "My sketchbook," she said. "I left it at the camp." I froze. That book had her drawings of the tower, the shadows, everything. "We can't go back," I said, my voice cracking. But Lena was adamant, saying it was her life's work. Theo called it a dumb idea, but I saw the guilt in her eyes. I made the worst mistake of my life. I agreed to go back. The drive back to the trailhead was silent, the road stretching like a trap. We parked, the forest darker now, the tower's silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. I grabbed my flashlight, Theo his axe, and Lena a spare headlamp. We hiked fast, the trail feeling tighter, like it was closing in. My heart pounded, every shadow a threat. I kept thinking of those true crime shows where people go back for something trivial and never come out. This was our horror story now, and I was walking right into it. We reached the camp, the fire pit cold, Lena's sketchbook lying in the dirt. She grabbed it, clutching it like a shield. But as we turned to leave, the hum started again, low, pulsing, everywhere. My flashlight flickered, then died. Theo swore, raising his axe, but the hum grew deafening, shaking the ground. Something moved in the dark, fast, circling us. Lena screamed, dropping her headlamp. I grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the trail, but Theo froze, staring at the tower. "It's up there," he whispered, his voice raw with fear. I didn't look, just ran, dragging Lena with me. Theo's footsteps followed, then stopped. I turned, my heart sinking. He was gone, his axe lying in the dirt. "Theo," I shouted, but the hum swallowed my voice. Lena was sobbing, pulling me toward the jeep. I wanted to go back for him, but that thing was too close, its presence crushing. We stumbled to the jeep, my hands shaking as I started it. The hum chased us down the road, fading only when we hit the highway. Lena was crying, her sketchbook stained with dirt and something darker. Morning broke as we reached Fresno, the city's lights a cruel contrast to the night. Lena wouldn't talk, just held her sketchbook, her face hollow. I kept seeing Theo's axe, abandoned, and those glowing eyes in the tower. I reported him missing at the police station, but the cops' skeptical look told me they wouldn't find him. The news later called it a hiking accident, but I knew better. That thing in the Sierra wasn't human, wasn't animal. It was something ancient, tragic, and horrifyingly real. I still see those eyes in my dreams, feel that hum in my bones. Lena moved away, her sketches unsold, her spirit broken. I drive past the Sierra sometimes, but I'll never go back. That tower, that thing, took Theo, took our peace, and left us with a story nobody believes. It's a wound that won't heal, a disturbing truth we can't escape. I keep the torn fabric from the lake in a drawer, a reminder of the deadly mistake I made, going back for that damn sketchbook. I'm Soren Caldwell, 34 years old, and I live in Redding, California, where the heat and monotony can choke you. I needed a break, so I planned a camping trip to an abandoned fire lookout tower in Lassen National Forest, about an hour away. My old friend Maris, 36, a sarcastic bartender from Chico, and her cousin Dax, 28, a quiet mechanic from Sacramento, tagged along. We loaded my battered Toyota pickup with tents, a cooler, and Maris's guitar, chasing a weekend of peace. The idea was to unplug, maybe jam under the stars, but something about those old towers, lonely, rusted, felt like it was calling us into something darker. The drive to Lassen was bumpy, the road narrowing as we climbed. Maris blasted her punk playlist, singing off-key, while Dax stared out the window, lost in thought. We stopped at a diner in Chester, grabbing burgers and a local's warning about the tower. "Folks don't stay up there long," the waitress said, her eyes flicking to my map. I laughed it off, but her words stuck, like a bad taste you can't shake. Maris teased me for looking spooked, but I noticed Dax's hands tighten on his coffee mug, like he sensed something too. We hit the trailhead by late afternoon, the sun dipping behind volcanic peaks. The hike to the tower was brutal, steep, rocky, with air so thin it burned my lungs. Maris complained about her boots, while Dax carried most of the gear, silent as ever. The tower came into view, a skeletal frame perched on a ridge, its windows dark, paint peeling like dead skin. It looked wrong, like it didn't belong in the forest. I tried to shake the feeling, blaming it on too many late-night horror podcasts, but my gut was already twisting. We set up camp at the tower's base, pitching tents in a clearing littered with pine cones. Maris strummed her guitar, the notes sharp in the still air, while Dax built a fire, his hands steady but his eyes scanning the trees. I unpacked the cooler, cracking open a beer, trying to act normal. The tower loomed over us, its shadow long and cold. I remembered a story from reading about a ranger who'd worked these towers, swearing they were cursed. I didn't mention it, didn't want to sound crazy, but the place felt off, disturbingly so. Maris suggested climbing the tower for a sunset view, but Dax shook his head, saying it looked unsafe. She rolled her eyes, calling him a buzzkill, but I sided with him. The ladder was rusted, half the rungs loose. Instead, we sat by the fire, passing beers and swapping stories. Maris told us about a bar fight she'd broken up in Chico, her laugh loud but forced. Dax mentioned fixing a car for a guy who'd rambled about things in the woods. We laughed, but the forest silence swallowed our voices, heavy and unsettling. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and we huddled closer to the fire. Maris strummed a slow tune, but her fingers fumbled, like she was distracted. Dax kept glancing at the tower, his jaw tight. I tried to focus on the flames, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. I remembered a true crime show about campers in Lassen who'd vanished, their gear left untouched. My beer tasted sour, and I set it down, my hands shaky. The tower's silhouette seemed to shift in the dark, like it was leaning closer. I wandered to the pickup for more firewood, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. Something caught my eye, a faint scratch on a nearby tree, deep and fresh, like claws had raked it. My heart skipped, but I told myself it was just a bear. Still, I hurried back, the wood heavy in my arms. Maris was mid-song, but she stopped when she saw my face. "You good, Soren?" she asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Dax didn't look convinced, his eyes locked on the trees, like he'd seen something too. We tried to keep the mood light, roasting hot dogs and joking about city life. But the forest was too quiet. No crickets, no wind, just our voices echoing back. Maris set her guitar down, saying it felt wrong to play. Dax nodded, his usual silence heavier now. I glanced at the tower, its windows like empty eyes. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker inside, like a light switching on and off. I blinked and it was gone. Exhaustion, I told myself, but my skin prickled with a scary, nagging dread. As we crawled into our tents, the air felt thicker, like it was pressing down. Maris's tent was closest to the tower, Dax's by the fire, mine in between. I zipped up, my sleeping bag feeling too thin. Dax's flashlight glowed in his tent, like he couldn't sleep either. Then I heard it, a low, uneven creak, like the tower's ladder shifting under weight. My breath caught, and I sat up, listening. It stopped, then started again, deliberate, like something was climbing. I wanted to call out, but fear glued my tongue. Something was out there, and it felt disturbingly close. Sunrise barely pierced the thick pines, leaving our camp in a cold, gray haze. I crawled out of my tent, my neck stiff from a night of tossing, that creaking ladder sound still echoing in my head. Maris was up, poking at the fire's ashes, her usual smirk gone. Dax sat on a log, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes, his eyes flicking to the tower. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, way off. I tried to act normal, brewing coffee, but my hands shook, spilling grounds everywhere. Maris broke the silence, her voice low. "You heard that noise last night, right, Soren?" I nodded, not trusting myself to say much. Dax grunted, still sharpening his knife, but didn't offer details. I mentioned the claw marks on the tree, hoping they'd laugh it off as a bear. Instead, Maris's face tightened, and she pointed to the ground near her tent. More scratches, deep and jagged, like something had circled us while we slept. My stomach dropped, the horror of it sinking in. We decided to check the tower, thinking daylight might make it less creepy. The ladder groaned under my weight, Maris right behind me, Dax staying below, muttering about bad vibes. At the top, the trapdoor was unlocked, which felt wrong. Hadn't it been padlocked in old photos I'd seen online? Inside, the room was a wreck, shattered glass, a torn mattress, papers scattered like someone had fled. A faint smell, like rotting meat, made my nose burn. Maris gagged, covering her mouth, and I felt a chill that wasn't just the morning air. I picked up a crumpled logbook, its pages stained and brittle. Entries from the 80s talked about lights in the trees and voices at night. One line, scrawled in shaky ink, read, "It watches us." My heart thudded. This was straight out of a horror movie, but it was real, disturbingly real. Maris grabbed my arm. pointing to a corner where a pile of bones, small, maybe animal, sat neatly arranged. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice shaking. I nodded, but curiosity kept me rooted, stupidly. Back at camp, Dax was pacing, his knife now tucked in his belt. "Find anything?" he asked, his tone sharp. I showed him the logbook, and his face went pale when he read that line. Maris suggested hiking to a nearby ridge for better cell service to call for help, but Dax shook his head. "We're not splitting up." I agreed. Every scary story I'd heard, from Reading ghost tales to missing hiker reports, screamed that splitting up was a death sentence. But staying felt just as bad. We packed light for the ridge, grabbing water and a map, hoping to get a signal. The trail was steep, volcanic rocks slipping under our boots. Maris kept looking back, like she expected something to lunge from the trees. Dax led, his knife out now, cutting through overgrown brush. I noticed more claw marks on a pine, fresh and deep, like whatever made them was following our path. My pulse raced, but I didn't say anything. Fear was already choking us, and I didn't want to make it worse. At the ridge, the view was stunning. Snow-capped peaks, endless forest, but no signal. Maris cursed, tossing a rock into the valley. Dax scanned the horizon, then froze, pointing to a distant clearing. Something moved, big, too big for a bear, slipping behind a boulder. My mouth went dry. I remembered a Lassen legend about a creature that stalked rangers, never fully seen. "Just a deer." I lied, but my voice cracked. Maris's eyes were wide, her hands trembling as she gripped her phone, still searching for bars. We headed back, the trail feeling tighter, the trees closer, like they were hurting us. Dax stopped suddenly, pointing to a patch of dirt. There, clear as day, were tracks, not animal, not human, but something else, with long, clawed toes. My skin crawled, the horror sinking deeper. Maris whispered, "What the hell is that?" Nobody answered. I thought of that diner waitress's warning, her eyes knowing too much. We hurried back to camp, the tower's silhouette looming like a warning, its shadow swallowing our tents. As we reached the clearing, the air shifted, colder, heavier. The fire pit was disturbed, ashes scattered, and Maris's guitar was gone. Not broken, not dropped, gone. Dax's knife was out again, his knuckles white. I checked my tent, finding my sleeping bag slashed, stuffing spilling out like guts. Something had been here, something that didn't just wander by. The forest was silent, but it wasn't empty. I felt it watching, waiting, and the scary truth hit me. We weren't alone, and whatever was out there was closing in. The tower's shadow stretched over our camp like a claw, the morning light doing nothing to ease the chill in my bones. Those tracks we'd found, clawed, wrong, burned in my mind, and the missing guitar felt like a taunt. Maris was quieter now, her usual sarcasm buried under a tight jaw. Dax sharpened his knife faster, the scraping sound grating on my nerves. I tried to focus on packing up, but every rustle in the trees made my heart lurch. The forest wasn't just quiet. It was holding its breath, and the horror of it was sinking in fast. I suggested we hike out, get to the pickup, and leave. Maris nodded, her eyes darting to the tower, but Dax hesitated, gripping his knife. "We need to know what's out there," he said, his voice low. I wanted to argue. Every scary story I'd heard, from Reading bar tales to missing camper reports, screamed to run, but his stubbornness was infectious. Maris, though, was done. "Screw that," she snapped, already slinging her pack on. The tension between us crackled like a bad wire. We compromised. One last look at the tower, then we'd bolt. The ladder creaked louder this time, like it was warning us. Inside, the rotting smell was stronger, and those bones in the corner looked rearranged, like someone had been here. Maris froze, pointing to a wall where scratches formed jagged lines, almost like writing. My flashlight beam shook as I read, "Stay away." My gut twisted. This wasn't a prank. It felt like the tower itself was alive, disturbingly so, and we were trespassing on something ancient. Dax found a rusted trapdoor in the floor, half hidden under debris. Against my better judgment, I helped him pry it open, revealing a dark, narrow shaft descending into the tower's base. A cold draft hit us, carrying that same rotting stench, now mixed with something metallic, like blood. Maris backed away, whispering, "This is bad, Soren." I nodded, but Dax was already peering down, his knife ready. I remembered a Lassen Ranger story about a tower with a basement nobody used, nobody living, anyway. My skin crawled. We climbed down, leaving the trapdoor open, the shaft's walls slick with damp. At the bottom, a small chamber opened up, littered with old cans and something worse, tattered cloth, stained dark, piled in a corner. My flashlight caught a glint. A broken watch, its face cracked, still ticking faintly. Maris gagged, covering her nose. Dax knelt, picking up a shard of what looked like bone, human-sized. The air down here was thick, oppressive, like it was pushing us out. Horror wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was real, clawing at us. Then it came, a low, throbbing drone, like a heartbeat, vibrating through the walls. My chest tightened, my ears ringing. Maris grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Soren, we gotta go," she hissed. Dax stood, knife raised, staring into the dark where the chamber narrowed into a tunnel. Something moved down there, big, hunched, its shape wrong, like it didn't fit in this world. Its eyes glinted, not like an animal's, but sharp, knowing. My scream stuck in my throat, and we scrambled up the ladder, the drone chasing us. Back in the tower room, we slammed the trapdoor shut, but the drone didn't stop. It grew louder, shaking the floor. Maris was crying now, her bravado gone. Dax shoved the broken mattress over the trapdoor, but it felt useless. We bolted down the ladder, my boots slipping, heart pounding like it had burst. At the camp, our tents were shredded, gear scattered like a storm had hit. My sleeping bag was gone, replaced by more claw marks, deeper, angrier. Whatever was down there wasn't just scary, it was hunting us. We grabbed what was left, my pack, Dax's knife, Maris's phone, and ran for the trail. The drone followed, pulsing through the ground, like the forest itself was alive with it. I glanced back, and for a split second, I saw it. A shape, too tall, too thin, slipping between the trees, its eyes locked on us. My legs burned, but fear kept me moving. I thought of those missing campers, their faces on faded posters in Reading. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was our horror, and it was closing in fast. Maris stumbled, her ankle twisting, and I hauled her up, her weight heavy against me. Dax was ahead, knife out, slashing at branches like they were enemies. The trail felt endless, the pickup too far. The drone shifted, now mixed with a wet, scraping sound, like something dragging itself after us. My flashlight was useless in the daylight, but I kept it on, clutching it like a lifeline. Whatever was behind us wasn't just a threat, it was wrong, disturbingly wrong, and it wasn't letting us go. The drone pulsed through my bones as we ran, the trail a blur of rocks and roots. Maris limped, her ankle swollen, but fear kept her moving. Dax led, his knife slashing at branches, his face hard but pale. My lungs burned, the pickup so close yet feeling miles away. That thing, those glinting eyes, that wrong shape, was behind us, its scraping steps too close. I clutched my useless flashlight, my heart slamming like a drum. Every horror movie I'd seen screamed we wouldn't make it, but I pushed the thought down, focusing on the trailhead's faint glow. We stumbled into a ravine, the path dipping sharply. Maris slipped, her cry sharp as she hit the ground. I hauled her up, her hands clammy, her eyes wild. "It's coming, Soren," she gasped. Dax spun, knife raised, scanning the trees. The drone grew louder, mixed with a wet, gurgling sound, like something choking on its own hunger. I remembered a Reading News clip about a hiker found torn apart in Lassen. Rangers blamed a cougar, but the wounds were too clean. This was no cougar. The trail split again, the map useless in my pack. Dax pointed left, swearing it was the way, but Maris shook her head, tears streaming. "Right, it's right," she insisted. My head spun, another wrong choice could kill us. The drone was deafening now, shaking the ground. I chose right, praying Maris was right. Dax cursed but followed, his knife glinting in the dim light. The forest felt alive, branches snapping like they were reaching for us. The horror was suffocating, every step a gamble with death. We hit a clearing, the pickup's outline barely visible through the trees. Hope flared, then died as the drone turned to a screech, high and piercing, like metal on bone. I glanced back, stupid move, and saw it. Tall, twisted, its skin glistening like tar, eyes burning in the dark. My legs nearly gave out, but I dragged Maris forward, her sobs loud in my ears. Dax shouted something, but the screech drowned him out. It was close, too close, and running wasn't enough anymore. The pickup was steps away when Maris fell again, her ankle giving out. I yanked her up, my arms burning, but she was heavy, slowing us down. Dax turned, knife out, yelling at the thing to back off. It didn't. A branch snapped, too heavy, too deliberate, and the screech stopped, replaced by silence that felt worse. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped them. Maris clung to me, whispering, "Don't look back." But I felt it, that thing's gaze, boring into us, disturbingly alive. We reached the pickup, doors slamming as we piled in. I turned the key, the engine sputtering once, twice. My heart stopped, then roaring to life. Headlights cut through the dark, catching a glimpse of it. Hunched, motionless, just beyond the trees, watching. I floored it, tires spinning on dirt, the trailhead vanishing behind us. Maris was crying, Dax gripping his knife, staring out the back. The screech started again, fainter but following, like it knew we weren't free yet. The road twisted, my hands slick on the wheel. Every shadow looked like that thing, every noise its screech. Maris kept muttering, "We're not safe," her voice raw. Dax was silent, his knife still out, like he expected it to crash through the window. I thought of those Lassen legends, stories of something older than the forest, something that hunted for sport. My chest tightened. This wasn't just scary, it was a nightmare we couldn't wake from. The pickup shook as we hit pavement, but the weight of that thing's presence clung to us. We passed the Chester Diner, its neon sign a blur. I wanted to stop, to feel human again, but stopping felt like inviting it back. Maris checked her phone. No signal, still. Dax finally spoke, his voice low. "It let us go." I didn't believe him. That thing didn't let go. It was playing with us, like a cat with a mouse. The highway stretched ahead, but the forest's edge felt too close, its shadows too deep. We were alive, but the horror wasn't done with us. I kept driving, my eyes burning, the road a lifeline. Maris leaned against the window, her breaths uneven. Dax's knife stayed in his lap, his hands steady but his eyes haunted. The screech was gone, but the silence was worse, like the calm before a storm. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd left something behind, or that it had followed us. Every mile felt like borrowed time, and the disturbing truth hit me. We'd escaped the forest, but not the thing that lived in it. The highway hummed under the pickup's tires, but my heart wouldn't slow. Maris stared out the window, her face pale, hands clutching her phone like it could save her. Dax sat rigid, his knife still out, eyes scanning the dark. I wanted to believe we'd left that thing behind, but its eyes, those burning, knowing eyes, haunted me. I remembered a story from reading about a trucker who saw something on this road, something that followed him for miles. Nobody believed him, but I did now. This horror wasn't just in the forest, it was loose, and it had our scent. We stopped at a gas station in Susanville, the fluorescent lights harsh after the dark. The clerk, a bored kid, barely looked up as I paid for coffee. Maris stayed in the pickup, her ankle propped up, her face blank. Dax paced outside, knife tucked away but his hands twitching. I asked the clerk if he'd heard of anything weird in Lassen. He shrugged, saying, "Just bears." But his eyes flicked to the door, like he knew better. That waitress's warning from Chester echoed in my head, disturbingly clear. Back in the pickup, Maris spoke, her voice small. "My guitar. It's still up there." I froze, my coffee burning my hand. She'd left it when we ran, her prized possession, signed by some punk band she loved. "We can't go back," I said, my voice sharp. But her eyes were desperate, like losing it would break her. Dax shook his head, calling it suicide, but Maris begged, saying it was all she had left of her old life. I made the dumbest call of my life. I agreed to go back, just for her. The drive back was torture, the forest swallowing us again. We parked at the trailhead, the tower's silhouette black against the dawn. I grabbed my flashlight, Dax's knife, Maris a stick for her ankle. The trail felt different now, tighter, like it was waiting. My heart pounded, every shadow a threat. I thought of those missing hikers, their faces on news reports, and realized we were walking into the same trap. This was our horror story, and I'd just signed us up for the ending. We reached the camp, the clearing a mess, tents shredded, gear gone. Maris's guitar lay near the fire pit, strings broken, body scratched like it had been clawed. She grabbed it, tears streaming, but the drone started again, low and angry, shaking the ground. My flashlight died, plunging us into gray dawn. Dax raised his knife, shouting, "Run!" But the drone became a screech, and that thing stepped out, tall, glistening, its eyes locked on us. Maris froze, her guitar slipping from her hands. I grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the trail, but she was heavy, her ankles slowing us. Dax swung his knife, slicing at the air as the thing lunged, faster than anything should be. Its claw grazed his arm, blood spraying. He screamed, dropping the knife, and I dragged Maris faster, my lungs burning. The screech was everywhere, the forest alive with it. I glanced back. Dax was gone, swallowed by the trees, his scream cut short. My heart broke, but I kept running, Maris sobbing beside me. We reached the pickup, my hands shaking as I started it. The engine roared, but something slammed against the back, rocking us. I didn't look, just floored it, the trailhead fading in the rearview. Maris was crying, her guitar left behind again, her hands bloody from the fall. The screech faded, but the weight of those eyes stayed, like they were burned into my soul. We hit the highway, Susanville's lights a faint promise, but the horror clung to us, heavy and inescapable. Back in Redding, I reported Dax missing, but the cops brushed it off. Another hiker lost, they said. Maris moved to Sacramento, quitting music, her spark gone. I drive past Lassen sometimes, but I'll never go back. That thing took Dax, took Maris's fire, and left me with nightmares of those eyes. The claw marks on my pickup's tailgate are still there, a disturbing reminder of what we faced. I keep that broken watch from the tower in a box, ticking faintly, like it's counting down to something. Every night, I hear that drone, feel that thing watching. I check the locks twice, but it's not enough. The news calls Dax's case a tragic accident, but I know the truth. That tower, that creature, was no accident. It was ancient, hungry, and we were just prey. Maris texts sometimes, but she's a ghost of herself. My mistake, going back for that guitar, cost us everything, and the scary truth is, it's still out there, waiting for the next fool to climb that tower. I'm Nora Kwan, 31 years old, and I live in Santa Barbara, California, where the ocean breeze can't quite drown out the grind of daily life. I needed a break, so I planned a camping trip to an abandoned fire lookout tower in Los Padres National Forest, a few hours away. My friend Cal, 35, a laid-back carpenter from Ventura, and his sister Ren, 29, a restless barista from Pasadena, came along. We crammed into my old Subaru, packed with tents, a cooler, and Cal's beat-up harmonica, chasing a weekend of quiet under the stars. But those towers, rusted, forgotten, had a vibe that felt wrong, like they were waiting for us. The drive to Los Padres was rough, the road twisting through Chaparral Hills. Cal played his harmonica, the notes wobbly but cheerful, while Ren scrolled her phone, muttering about no signal. We stopped at a gas station in Ojai, grabbing snacks and a map since GPS was spotty. The clerk, a wiry woman with sharp eyes, raised an eyebrow when I mentioned the tower. "That place ain't right," she said, handing me change. I brushed it off as local superstition, but her words stuck, heavy and unsettling. We hit the trailhead by dusk, the sky glowing orange over rugged peaks. The hike to the tower was steep, my boots slipping on loose gravel. Cal carried most of the gear, joking about building a better trail, while Ren lagged, snapping photos of twisted oaks. The tower loomed ahead, its metal frame weathered, windows boarded like shut eyes. It felt off, like it was holding a secret. I laughed, blaming my nerves on too many creepy podcasts, but my stomach churned with a quiet dread. We set up camp at the tower's base, tents in a tight circle around a fire pit. Cal got a fire going, the flames dancing as he played a slow harmonica tune. Ren sketched the tower on a napkin, her lines quick and jagged. I cracked open a soda, trying to settle my nerves, but the forest was too quiet. No birds, no breeze, just our voices. I remembered a Santa Barbara news story about a hiker lost in these hills, never found. The thought made my soda taste flat, the horror creeping in. Cal suggested climbing the tower for a view, but Rin shook her head, saying it looked ready to collapse. I agreed. The ladder was rusted, bolts loose. Instead, We sat by the fire, swapping stories. Kel talked about a bar fight he'd seen in Ventura, his laugh loud but forced. Ren mentioned a customer at her cafe who'd rambled about things in the woods. We chuckled, but the silence around us felt heavy, like it was listening. The tower's shadows seemed to shift, stretching closer. As night fell, the air turned sharp, the fire our only warmth. Ren's napkin sketch lay by her feet, the tower's outline almost menacing. Cal played another tune, but it faltered, like he felt the same unease. I kept glancing at the tower, its boarded windows like voids. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker inside, like a candle flaring up. I blinked and it was gone. Just my imagination, I told myself, but my hands shook as I zipped my jacket. Something about this place felt disturbingly wrong. I wandered to the Subaru for more firewood, my flashlight beam jittery. Something caught my eye, a deep gouge in a nearby tree, fresh, like something had clawed it. My heart skipped, but I chalked it up to an animal. Still, I hurried back, the wood heavy in my arms. Cal was mid-story, but he stopped when he saw my face. "You okay, Nora?" he asked. I nodded, not wanting to scare them, but Ren's eyes were on the trees, like she'd seen something too. We tried to keep the mood light, roasting marshmallows, but the fire's crackle sounded too loud in the stillness. Ren set her sketch aside, her hands unsteady. Cal's harmonica sat silent, his usual grin gone. I noticed more gouges near the fire pit, half hidden in the dirt. My chest tightened, thinking of those missing hiker stories, their gear left behind. The tower loomed over us, its presence heavy, like it was daring us to stay. As we crawled into our tents, the air felt thicker, like it was pressing in. Cal's tent was closest to the Subaru, Ren's by the fire, mine near the tower. I zipped up, my sleeping bag feeling flimsy. Ren's flashlight glowed in her tent, like she couldn't sleep. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like metal on metal, coming from the tower. My breath caught, and I sat up, listening. It stopped, then started again, slow and deliberate. Something was up there, and it felt scary close. Morning crept in, dim and cold, the tower's shadow swallowing our camp. I barely slept, that tapping from last night stuck in my head like a bad song. Cal was up, poking the fire's ashes, his harmonica silent on a log. Ren sat cross-legged, staring at her napkin sketch, her face tight. Those gouges in the tree and dirt haunted me, and the air felt wrong, like it was waiting for something. I tried to play it cool, boiling water for coffee, but my hands shook, spilling half the pot. The forest was too quiet, and the horror of it was starting to claw at me. Cal broke the silence, his voice low. "You heard that tapping, didn't you, Nora?" I nodded, my throat tight. Ren pointed to more marks near her tent, deep, jagged, like something had paced around us. "Not a bear," she whispered, her eyes wide. I wanted to argue, but my gut knew better. Those marks weren't natural, and they felt personal, like a warning. Cal suggested checking the tower, saying daylight might make it less creepy. My stomach churned, but I agreed. Ignorance felt scarier. The ladder groaned under our weight, Cal leading, me behind, Ren staying below, muttering about bad vibes. The trapdoor was ajar, which felt wrong. Hadn't it been boarded tight? Inside, the tower was a mess. Broken glass, a rusted stove, paper strewn like someone had bolted. A stale, sour smell hit me, like old sweat and decay. Cal found a logbook, its pages yellowed, entries from the 70s mentioning lights in the valley and noises below. One scrawl read, "It's under the tower." My heart thudded. This was straight out of a horror flick, but too real. I stepped on something soft, a torn glove, stiff with dark stains. Ren, who'd climbed up after all, gagged, pointing to a corner where a pile of feathers and small bones sat, arranged in a circle. "That's not normal," she said, her voice shaky. I nodded, my skin crawling. I remembered a Santa Barbara podcast about a ranger who vanished in Los Padres, leaving only his hat. This felt like that, disturbingly close. Cal suggested we hike to a ridge for cell service, but the idea of leaving camp felt like walking into a trap. We headed back down, the tower's stench clinging to us. At camp, Cal noticed his harmonica was moved, now near the fire pit, its case scratched. "Wasn't like that," he muttered, his usual grin gone. Ren's napkin sketch was gone too, just a torn corner left. My chest tightened. Something had been here, messing with us. I suggested packing up and leaving, but but Cal wanted to check the ridge first, saying we needed help. Ren agreed, her hands trembling as she grabbed her pack. Splitting up wasn't an option. Every scary story I knew said that was a death wish. The trail to the ridge was brutal, rocks slipping underfoot, the air thick with dust. Cal led, his steps quick, while Ren kept glancing back, her camera forgotten. I noticed more gouges on a tree, fresh and deep, like something was marking our path. My pulse raced, but I kept quiet. Panic wouldn't help. Halfway up, we found a rusted sign, half buried, reading "No entry." Cal laughed nervously, saying it was probably old, but Ren's face paled, like she knew something we didn't. The forest felt tighter, like it was closing in. At the ridge, the view was endless, hills rolling into haze, but no signal. Ren cursed, tossing a pebble over the edge. Cal scanned the horizon, then froze, pointing to a distant ravine. Something moved, big, hunched, slipping behind a boulder. My mouth went dry. I remembered a Los Padres legend about a shadow walker that stalked campers, never fully seen. Just a coyote, I lied, my voice thin. Ren shook her head, her hands shaking. The horror was real now, pressing down like a weight. We hurried back, the trail darker, the trees leaning in. Cal's harmonica was tucked in his pocket now, like a talisman. Ren kept muttering about her missing sketch, like it mattered more than it should. I noticed more marks in the dirt, not tracks exactly, but dragged lines, like something heavy had slithered through. My skin prickled, thinking of that logbook's warning, under the tower. We reached camp, the tower looming like a threat, its shadow colder, sharper. Something was wrong, disturbingly wrong, and it was watching us. Back at the fire pit, our cooler was tipped over, food scattered, cans punctured like they'd been bitten. Ren's tent had a long slash, her sleeping bag spilling out. Cal swore, kicking a rock, while I stood frozen, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The tapping started again, louder, from the tower's base, not the ladder. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, like a signal. My heart pounded, and I knew we weren't alone. Whatever was out here wasn't just scary, it was playing with us, and it was close. The tower loomed over our wrecked camp, its rusted frame swallowing the morning light. Those gouges, the missing sketch, the punctured cans, they felt like a message, and it wasn't friendly. Cal gripped his harmonica like a lifeline, his usual chill vibe gone. Ren stood by her slashed tent, her face pale, eyes locked on the tower. The tapping from last night echoed in my head, and the air felt thick, like it was daring us to stay. I tried to focus on repacking the cooler, but my hands shook, the horror of this place sinking in like damp rot. Cal spoke first, his voice tight. "We need to get out, Nora." I nodded, but Ren wanted to check the tower one last time, saying her sketch might be up there. I wanted to scream at her, forget the damn napkin, but her eyes were desperate, like it held her sanity. Cal sighed, agreeing to a quick look, but his jaw was set, like he knew it was a bad call. I thought of a Santa Barbara news story about campers vanishing in Los Padres, their gear left in pieces. This felt too close, disturbingly real. We climbed the ladder, each creak louder, like the tower was groaning. The trapdoor was still ajar, the sour smell stronger, now mixed with something sharp, like copper. Inside, the logbook lay open, a new page torn, fresh scratches on the floor spelling leave. My heart pounded. This wasn't here yesterday. Cal swore, kicking a piece of glass, while Ren searched for her sketch, her hands trembling. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued, the scary truth clawing at me. Something didn't want us here. Cal found a hatch in the floor, rusted but loose, leading to a dark shaft below. "No way," I said, but Ren was already prying it open, her need for that sketch overriding sense. A cold gust hit us, carrying that coppery stench, thicker now, like blood. I remembered a podcast about a Los Padres ranger who'd found offerings under a tower, bones, cloth, things that didn't belong. My skin crawled as we peered down, the shaft black as ink, swallowing my flashlight's beam. Against my gut, we descended, Cal first, then me, Ren last. The shaft opened into a damp chamber, walls slick with moss, littered with broken tools, and, God help me, more bones, human-sized, scattered like trash. Ren gasped, spotting her napkin sketch pinned to a wall, smeared with something dark. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, and shoved it in my pocket. The air was heavy, like it was pushing us out. This wasn't just creepy, it was a horror show, and we were center stage. Then it hit, a deep, grinding hum, vibrating through the walls, rattling my teeth. Ren froze, clutching Cal's arm. My flashlight flickered, catching a shadow in the tunnel beyond. Tall, twisted, moving wrong, like it wasn't bound by physics. Its eyes glinted, cold and sharp. Not animal, not human. My scream stuck, my legs jelly. Cal yanked us toward the ladder, shouting, "Go!" The hum grew louder, pulsing like a heart, and I knew we'd woken something disturbingly alive. We scrambled up, the hatch slamming behind us. But the hum followed, shaking the tower. Ren tripped, her knee bleeding, but Cal hauled her up, his face pale. Back at camp, our gear was worse. Tents collapsed, the Subaru's tires slashed. My heart sank. We weren't driving out. The hum stopped, replaced by a low, wet scrape, like something dragging itself closer. I thought of those vanished campers, their faces on faded flyers, and realized we were next in line for this nightmare. We grabbed what we could, my pack, Cal's harmonica, Ren's camera, and bolted for the trail. The scrape followed, weaving through the trees, too close. Ren's limp slowed us, her breaths ragged. Cal kept glancing back, his harmonica now tucked in his belt like a weapon. I saw it then, a shape, hunched, glistening, slipping between oaks, its eyes locked on us. My chest tightened, fear choking me. This wasn't just scary, it was a hunt, and we were the prey. The trail twisted, the Subaru useless behind us. The scrape grew louder, joined by a low growl, not animal, but wrong, like the forest itself was snarling. Ren whimpered, clutching her camera, while I tried to keep us moving, my flashlight bouncing uselessly. Cal's face was grim, his hand on his pocket knife, ready for a fight we couldn't win. The horror was suffocating, every step pulling us deeper into a trap. Whatever was in that tower wasn't letting us go. It was closing in, and we were running out of time. The growl turned into a shriek, piercing the dawn. As we stumbled down the trail, the Subaru's slashed tires a death sentence. Ren limped, her knee bleeding, while Cal gripped his pocket knife, his eyes wild. My flashlight was dead, but the gray light showed that thing, tall, glistening, its eyes like knives, slipping through the oaks. My heart pounded, my legs burning as I dragged Ren forward. The trail was a maze, roots snagging our boots. I thought of a Santa Barbara hiker's story, found torn apart in these hills, blamed on a mountain lion. This was no lion, it was horror itself, hunting us. We hit a fork in the path, the map useless in my pack. Cal pointed left, swearing it led to the highway, but Ren shook her head, gasping. Right? I saw a sign. My head spun, wrong choice, and we were done. The shriek came again, closer, shaking the ground. I picked right, trusting Ren, but Cal's scowl said he wasn't convinced. We ran, branches clawing my face, the air thick with that coppery stench. The forest felt alive, closing in, like it was part of the thing chasing us. A clearing opened up, the highway's faint rumble a lifeline. But the shriek turned wet, gurgling, like it was savoring the chase. Ren tripped, her camera smashing on a rock. I yanked her up, her sobs loud in my ears. Cal swung his knife at nothing, shouting, "Back off." The trees seemed to lean closer, shadows twisting into shapes. I remembered a Los Padres tale about a watcher that stalked campers, never letting them leave. My chest tightened. This wasn't just scary, it was a death trap, and we were caught. We pushed through a thicket, thorns tearing my jacket. The highway was close. I could see asphalt through the trees, but the shriek was right behind us, joined by heavy, dragging steps. My lungs screamed, but fear kept me moving. Ren's limp was worse, slowing us down. Cal turned, knife raised, his face pale but fierce. "Keep going, Nora," he yelled. I didn't want to leave him, but Ren was heavy, her breaths ragged. The horror was suffocating, every step a fight to survive. The highway appeared, a narrow strip of salvation. We burst out, gravel crunching underfoot, but the shriek followed, echoing from the trees. A truck's headlights flashed in the distance, and I waved frantically, my arms shaking. The driver slowed, a grizzled guy in a flannel, but the shriek stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Cal was still behind us, his knife no match for that thing. I screamed his name, but the forest swallowed my voice. its shadows too deep, too alive. The trucker pulled over, his face confused as I shoved Ren inside, babbling about something chasing us. He didn't believe me, but he locked the doors, muttering about damn kids. I looked back, hoping to see Cal, but the trees were still, too still. My heart sank. Had we lost him? The trucker drove, the highway stretching ahead, but that coppery smell lingered, like it was in the air. Ren clutched her smashed camera, tears streaming, while I scanned the dark, praying Cal was okay. We reached Ojai, the gas station's neon a harsh comfort. The clerk from yesterday was there, her sharp eyes narrowing as I stammered about Cal. "Told you that place ain't right," she said, her voice low. I begged her to call the Rangers, but my gut knew it was too late. The silence from the forest wasn't peace, it was a warning. I thought of those missing hikers, their stories buried in news archives, and realized we'd walked into the same nightmare. The horror wasn't gone, it was waiting. Ren was shaking, her knees swollen, her camera useless. I kept replaying Cal's shout, his knife flashing in the dawn. We'd made it out, but at what cost? The trucker dropped us at a diner, promising to call for help, but his eyes said he didn't expect much. I sat with Ren, her silence heavier than the forest's. The thing's eyes, those cold, glinting knives, burned in my mind, disturbingly real. We were alive, but the forest wasn't done with us, and Cal was still out there. I tried to call Cal's phone, but it went to voicemail, his cheerful greeting a gut punch. Ren whispered, "We left him, Nora." Her words cut deep, guilt mixing with fear. The diner's fluorescent buzz felt fake, like it couldn't protect us. The thing in the woods wasn't just a monster. It was something older, hungrier, tied to that tower. We'd escaped, but the scary truth was clear. It had let us go, and it wasn't finished playing its game. The diner's coffee was bitter, but I barely tasted it, my eyes glued to the window, half expecting that thing to step out of the dark. Ren sat across from me, her knee wrapped in a napkin, her face hollow. The trucker had called the Rangers, but hours passed with no word on Cal. His harmonica was in my pack, its scratches a cruel reminder of what we'd left behind. I thought of a Santa Barbara news story about a camper found dead in Los Padres, his body drained of blood. The horror of it clung to me, a weight I couldn't shake. Ren broke the silence, her voice small. "My sketch, it's still up there." I froze, her napkin sketch flashing in my mind, pinned in that awful chamber. "We're not going back," I said, sharper than I meant. But her eyes were desperate, like that sketch was her last piece of herself. Cal would have laughed at us, but guilt gnawed at me. He was gone because we ran. Against every instinct, I agreed to go back, my worst mistake yet. We hitched a ride to the trailhead with a ranger, a gruff guy who didn't buy our story but drove us anyway. The forest was darker now, the tower's silhouette a jagged scar against the sky. Ren limped, clutching her broken camera, while I carried Cal's harmonica, my flashlight shaking. The ranger stayed by his truck, radio crackling, his eyes saying we were fools. I felt it too, that disturbing pull of the tower, like it was calling us back into its trap. The trail was a nightmare, every shadow a threat, the coppery stench thick in the air. Ren's breaths were ragged, her knees slowing us down. I kept seeing Cal's face, his knife flashing, and hated myself for leaving him. We reached the camp, our gear gone, the fire pit scattered with fresh bones, small, wet, not animal. Ren gasped, spotting her sketch under a rock, smeared with something dark. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, the horror closing in like a noose. The hum started again, low and grinding, shaking the ground. Ren froze, her eyes wide. My flashlight flickered, catching that thing, tall, glistening, its eyes burning, stepping from the trees. I screamed, pulling Ren toward the trail, but she stumbled, her knee giving out. The hum turned to a shriek, deafening, as the thing lunged, faster than should have been possible. I shoved Ren behind me, clutching Cal's harmonica like it could save us. The ranger's truck was a faint hope, but the thing was faster, its claws raking the air. Ren screamed, her camera falling, as I dragged her forward. The shriek was everywhere, the forest alive with it. I glanced back, stupid, and saw it grab Ren, her scream cut short as it pulled her into the dark. I ran, tears blurring my vision, the ranger's truck in sight. He gunned the engine as I dove in, the door slamming as the shriek faded, but not before I saw those eyes, locked on me. We sped to Ojai, the ranger radioing for backup, his face pale. I clutched the sketch and harmonica, all I had left of Ren and Cal. The cops called it a wild animal attack, but I knew better. That thing was an animal. It was ancient, hungry, tied to that tower. I moved back to Santa Barbara, but the nightmares followed. Those eyes, that hum, Ren's scream. The sketch sits in a drawer. Its dark smears a haunting reminder of my mistake, going back for it. I drive past Los Padres sometimes, but I'll never stop. The Rangers' report said they found nothing. No Ren, no Cal, just bones and a slashed tent. The news called it a tragedy, but it was more, a horror that broke me. Cal's harmonica doesn't play right anymore. Its notes warped, like it's cursed too. I see those eyes in every shadow, feel that hum in my bones. That thing let me live, but it took everything else, and the disturbing truth is, it's still out there, waiting. I keep checking the news, hoping for answers, but there's nothing, just silence. The forest hides its secrets, and I'm left with guilt and fear. Ren's camera was never found, but her sketch haunts me, those dark smears like a warning I ignored. I should have known better, should have run and never looked back. That tower, that thing, it's not just a story. It's a wound that won't heal, a scary reality I'll carry forever.